In the month following the release of a massive culturally dominant teen television drama, a study published in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry reported something just absolutely staggering.
Right, a genuinely horrifying statistic.
Yeah, they tracked a 28.9% increase in suicides among American youth aged 10 to 17.
Wow.
A nearly 30% spike, and it was directly correlating with the release of television.
Which is just, I mean, it's hard to even wrap your head around that kind of real-world impact.
It really is. And it makes you ask, how does a piece of media, one that was created with the loudly stated explicit mission to start a dialogue and prevent this exact tragedy, how does it end up allegedly triggering a massive public health crisis?
Well, I think it forces us to confront a very uncomfortable reality about the content we consume. You know, we tend to view entertainment as passive. It's just a screen we look at to unwind at the end of the day.
Right, you just turn your brain off for an hour.
Exactly. But when that screen actively co-opts deep, unresolved trauma and packages it in highly addictive, bingeable format, the psychological impact on a vulnerable viewer isn't passive at all. It is measurable, and in this...
I was looking through the notes you sent over for today's dive, specifically this multi-hour, meticulously detailed video breakdown by the YouTube essayist Mert KK.
It's an incredible piece of analysis.
It really is. And honestly, it completely shattered how I view awareness, because today we are pointing our lens at Netflix's 13 Reasons Why, specifically that explosive first season.
The one that really set the cultural zeitgeist on fire.
Yeah, that one. We're unpacking its portrayal of mental health, high school bullying, and suicide. And alongside Mert KK's autopsy of the show's narrative structure, we're also digging into a fascinating philosophical pushback. It's excerpted from a piece called The Singularity of Truth,
which brings a really necessary, rigorous lens to this whole conversation. The mission for this deep dive is vital for anyone who interacts with all of us.
Right, you can't escape it.
No, you really can't. We want to extract the ultimate lessons on how popular media attempts and often catastrophically fails to portray complex mental health issues. We are going to explore the intense, often irreconcilable tension between compelling storytelling, corporate responsibility, and the real-world consequences of releasing psychological triggers to a massive audience.
It's a heavy mission.
It is.
Yeah.
But we have to separate the genuinely brilliant, grounded observations the show makes about teenage life from its incredibly dangerous missteps.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to genuinely understand where this narrative derails and becomes mathematically harmful, we cannot just look at the ending.
No, you have to look at the foundation.
Exactly. We have to start by acknowledging what it actually gets incredibly painfully accurate. We have to begin where the show began, in the before.
The anatomy of high school bullying. Because before we look at the extreme narrative contrivances that happen later, we need to analyze the baseline reality the show sets up.
So for those of you listening who might have missed this cultural juggernaut, let's establish the premise. The story centers on a young woman, Hannah Baker.
Right.
She dies by suicide, but she leaves behind a box of 13 cassette tapes. Each side of these tapes is dedicated to one of 13 specific people in her life, detailing exactly how their actions pushed her toward her tragic decision.
It's a very gripping hook for a mystery.
Oh, totally. Now, Mert KK makes a really critical observation right out of the gate in his video. While the overarching framework of the show eventually fails, it absolutely nails the slow, grinding, agonizing reality of the teenage experience.
What's fascinating here is the precise sociological mechanism of teenage bullying that the show initially captures. I mean, popular media usually portrays bullying as a cinematic event, right?
Like the jock aggressively shoving a nerd into a locker.
Exactly, or someone getting a slushie thrown in their face in the middle of the cafeteria.
Very Glee.
Very Glee. But real reputational destruction is a slow boil. Our source breaks this down perfectly. It operates on a specific timeline. It starts with a moment of innocent vulnerability,
which is then twisted.
Yeah, usually by someone else's insecurity, and it's twisted into a rumor. Then the rumor crystallizes into a permanent reputation. And then, crucially, that reputation becomes the societal justification for systemic, ongoing...
It's the evolution of cruelty. I mean, if you're listening, think back to your own high school experience, just the sheer terror of social standing. Let's look at the very first tape, Justin Foley.
Right, the inciting incident.
Yeah. Hannah is the new girl in town. She wants to present herself as this carefree, slightly mysterious, almost manic pixie dream girl type. So she manufactures these chance encounters with Justin.
She pretends she just happened to be walking by his basketball game.
Exactly. Just to flick her hair and act uninterested. It's a classic teenage mating, and it worked. They end up at a park after dark. They kiss on a slide. It's sweet. It's a moment of genuine human connection.
But then we see the mechanics of betrayal, and it's fueled entirely by male adolescent purity. Mert KK highlights that Justin is not presented initially as a cartoon monster.
Yeah, he's just a kid.
He is a deeply insecure young man, suffering immense suffocating pressure from his peer group to fit a very specific toxic mold.
The locker room mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is a mold that dictates treating women poorly, or at least objectifying them, to look cool, dominant, and emotionally unattached in front of the other guys.
So in the heat of that moment on the slide, Justin snaps a photo of Hannah sliding down, but the flash goes on.
Which ruins the secret.
Yeah, and because of the angle, it accidentally captures an obscured image. Now, he doesn't delete it. He sacrifices that genuine human connection they just had on the altar of adolescent peer pressure.
He shows it off to gain social.
Exactly. When another student, the wealthy alpha of the group, Bryce, sees the photo on Justin's phone, Bryce sends it out en masse to the entire school. And just like that, the entire student body instantly, collectively, believes Hannah was intimately involved with Justin on a playground.
The rumor is born. And notice the shift in power here. Hannah's agency is entirely stripped away by a single digital transmission.
It's terrifying.
It is. And the show depicts the spread of this rumor so viscerally, it taps into a very modern, very real adolescent nightmare.
Mert KK describes this agonizing scene, and it is so relatable it makes your stomach drop. Hannah is sitting in a quiet classroom, and suddenly, all around her, cell phones start buzzing and chiming.
The sound design in that scene is incredible.
It really is. Because it's a TV show, they all have the exact same default text ringtone to emphasize the point, which, is a bit of a heavy-handed creative choice.
A little bit, yeah.
But the emotional truth of the scene is staggering. I want you, listening right now, to imagine that paralyzing hot panic. You are trapped at your desk. You hear a chime in front of you, a buzz behind you.
The walls are closing in?
Yes. You watch the faces of your classmates light up. You see them glance at their screens, smirk, and then turn their eyes directly to you. The joke is spreading in real time, completely surrounding you.
And the biological response in that moment is pure fight or flight, but you are confined to a plastic chair. Your cortisol spikes.
Because if you react, it's worse.
Exactly. You know that if you stand up and run out of the room crying, you instantly validate the rumor. You give them the reaction they want, making it infinitely worse.
You should have to sit there, completely frozen, pretending you aren't dying inside, while the entire social structure of your world collapses around you. And Justin never stands up in that classroom and apologizes.
There is no Hollywood ending.
None. He doesn't realize his mistake, jump on a desk, and tell everyone to delete the photo. The reputation is cemented.
And once that reputation is cemented, it changes the rules of engagement for everyone else. It essentially opens the door for escalating normalized, which brings us to the next stage, Alex Standal, and the creation of the infamous best ass, worst ass.
Right.
Alex physically writes Hannah's name under best and another girl, Jessica, under worst, and this list gets passed around the school. Now, the source points out a crucial distinction regarding the mechanics of bullying here. It is not the physical piece of paper itself that destroys Hannah's mental state.
I found that distinction brilliant when I read the notes. A list on a piece of paper is just ink. It's what the list leverages that causes the damage.
Exactly. It relies on the infrastructure of the rumor Justin already built.
Right. It acts as a public broadcast to the rest of the school that Hannah is essentially public property. It signals that she is officially open to this kind of aggressive objectification. It justifies the subsequent, much darker abuse from older boys who now view her through this completely distorted, hypersexualized lens.
She isn't a person anymore to them.
No, she is the girl on the list.
The compounding nature of reputational damage is what makes it, and the timeline progresses further to Ryan Shaver. Hannah is drowning in this toxic environment, so she joins a poetry club. She desperately tries to carve out a tiny, quiet, safe space.
Somewhere she can just breathe.
Yes, and she writes a deeply personal, incredibly vulnerable poem about her feelings of isolation. She explicitly tells Ryan, a fellow member she thought she could trust, that she does not want it published.
She is setting a firm boundary.
A very clear boundary. And what does he do? He publishes it in the school magazine anyway. It's anonymous. But in a school that small, everyone instantly knows it's her.
The violation is so profound. Even her English teacher discusses the poem's themes of depression in front of the whole class while people are openly mocking.
It is a complete structural failure of her environment. Her peers betray her, and the adult figures are so clueless that they accidentally facilitate.
And Mert KK uses this incredibly vivid analogy to describe how this type of bullying functions when you already have a damaged reputation. He calls it the bird poop analogy.
Yes, I love this analogy.
I want to build on this because it perfectly encapsulates the psychological dread of the marginalized student.
Let's delve into the mechanics of that analogy, as it perfectly visualizes the hypervigilance of a trauma.
So imagine you're at school. For whatever reason, your absolute biggest fear is a bird pooping on your head. So what do? You change your entire life to avoid it.
You're constantly looking up.
Right. You refuse to walk under trees. You nervously check the tops of lampposts before you cross the street. You walk close to the walls. Why? Because you already have a reputation as the weirdo or the outcast. You are just trying to keep your head down, get through the 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. gauntlet, and survive the slow boil of high school.
You are meticulously managing your environment.
But you cannot control random chance. I mean, you're entirely at the mercy of uncontrollable variables. A random act of God or a random act of betrayal, like Ryan Shaver stealing your private poem, drops right on your head from a clear blue sky.
And all that management failed.
Instantly. Suddenly, despite all your careful navigation, the spotlight is blindingly back on you. All the people in the cafeteria who had momentarily forgotten about you, who had moved on to mocking someone else, instantly remember that you are the designated target.
The hell starts all over again.
And you realize your vigilance meant absolutely nothing.
This accurately reflects the crushing psychological weight of a bullied teenager. It's not a constant, high-volume screaming match in the hallways every single day. It is an environment of perpetual humming dread.
Always waiting for the next shoe to drop.
Right. You are walking on eggshells knowing that any minor incident, any misstep, any random external event will be instantly weaponized against you because your fundamental standing in the social hierarchy has already been degraded.
The baseline is gone.
Exactly. And the show, in its early episodes, captures this suffocating atmosphere with terrifying acts.
But if the show only focused on the bullies, the people actively throwing the rocks, it would just be a standard after-school special.
A very well-produced one, but yes.
Right. The narrative deepens, and it gets incredibly murky when it shifts its focus away from the aggressors and points the finger directly at the bystander. The friends who failed, not out of cinematic malice, but out of mundane fear, confusion, and miscommunication.
The inaction of the periphery. This is the pivot point where the show begins to demand a much closer, highly critical look at the concept of subjective reality, and where it really starts to stumble under the weight of its own premise.
Let's analyze Jessica Davis. She and Hannah are both new girls to the school. They bond over this shared feeling of profound alienation.
They're outsiders together.
Yeah. They start going to Monet's coffee shop every single day after school. It becomes their sanctuary, away from the rumor. But eventually, as teenage friendships often do, the sanctuary fractures. The friendship dissolves.
It just naturally falls apart.
Right. Now, on the cassette tapes, Hannah paints a picture of absolute devastating abandonment. She claims Jessica and another boy, Alex, just stopped showing up, leaving Hannah to sit alone at the cafe booth day after day, until she finally tragically gave up. She frames herself as the discarded victim.
But the show presents a violent collision of narratives here. When our present-day protagonist, Clay Jensen, who is listening to these tapes and essentially investigating when he confronts Jessica about this specific claim, Jessica explodes in anger.
She is furious.
He tells Clay point blank not to believe everything he hears on those tapes. She insists Hannah is lying, or at least deeply.
Yeah.
Jessica claims Hannah is actually the one who stopped coming to Monet's first.
I want to pause here and bring in our second source, the philosophical excerpt from The Singularity of Truth, because this is so vital. When Mert KK discusses this coffee shop discrepancy in his video, he casually brushes past it. He says something like, well, maybe Hannah and Jessica just have their own truths. They both felt abandoned.
A very common modern sentiment.
Exact. But this philosophical piece fiercely, aggressively rejects that phrasing. The author argues that society's current obsession with saying people have their own truths is intellectually bankrupt.
It's a very strong stance.
Well, it doesn't hold back. It argues that truth is not an object you can put in your pocket. It is an objective reality that occurred in space and time.
It is a vital philosophical distinction to make, especially when we are analyzing a medium like a suicide note, which inherently dictates an unchallenged narrative. The source argues that confusing perspective truth insulates flawed human memory from objective scrutiny.
I have to challenge that strict interpretation a bit, though. Isn't it incredibly common, almost guaranteed, for two human beings to remember the slow death of a friendship differently?
Oh, absolutely. Memory is malleable.
Right. If Jessica felt pushed away by Hannah's depression, and Hannah felt abandoned by Jessica's new popularity, aren't those both valid emotional truths? Why is the source so militant about there being no such thing as subjective truth? Isn't human memory inherently flawed anyway?
Human memory is absolutely flawed, and emotional resonance is entirely subjective. You can both feel abandoned, and both feelings are valid. But the source's argument is about the danger of equating emotional validity with objective fact when you are acting as a prosecutor.
Ah, okay.
Hannah is not just writing in a diary about how sad she feels. She is recording a localized criminal prosecution. She is assigning life-ruining blame to 13 people. If truth isn't subjective, if someone actually physically stopped walking through the doors of Monet's cafe first, then one of them is fact correct.
Someone stopped showing up first. That is a physical fact.
Exactly. And if Hannah's foundational facts are skewed by her own deteriorating perspective, where does that leave the audience's judgment of condemning?
That completely reframes the viewing experience. If she is an unreliable narrator building a prosecution, it makes the show's underlying morality deeply hypocritical. Well, the narrative structure of 13 Reasons Why demands immense unconditional grace, empathy, and understanding for Hannah. We are asked to constantly forgive her missteps and deeply understand her deteriorating mental state.
Which we should.
Yes, absolutely. But the show offers absolutely none of that grace to the other teenagers who are also messy, confused adolescents.
That is the core hypocrisy the sources point.
Which brings us to the most painful example of this, Zach Dempsey.
Zach Dempsey is the quintessential example of a teenager acting exactly like a confused, emotionally unequipped teenager and being eternally punished by the narrative for it. Let's look at his interaction with Hannah.
Okay.
He tries to comfort her after she suffers a particularly horrible public humiliation at a diner. His intention actually seems genuine. He sees a girl in pain.
Right, he's not trying to be malicious.
Not initially, but when he tries to pivot and ask her out, he uses incredibly clumsy, deeply objectifying language. He references that terrible best ass list we talked about earlier. He tells her she's not just a nice ass, but so much more.
God is a masterclass in awful execution.
It really is.
He thinks he's giving her a compliment by elevating her above the room, but he's just reminding her of her own trauma. Hannah, who is understandably defensive, exhausted, and feeling hunted by the male population of the school, laughs in his face and brutally, loudly rejects.
And we have to analyze the psychology of Zach's response here. How does an 18-year-old boy, whose ego has just been publicly bruised in front of his peers, respond? No. Not with grand, cinematic, calculating villainy, though. He responds with the mechanism of pure defense.
Yeah.
Soul-crushing pettiness.
The school has this forced, somewhat childish initiative where every student has a compliment bag taped to their desk in a specific classroom to build morale, right?
Yes.
Very typical high school forced empathy exercise.
Exactly. So Zach is so stung, so embarrassed by her rejection, that for weeks he silently, systematically steals the few nice notes Hannah receives out of her bag. He just slips them into his pocket when no one is. It is an incredibly small, almost pathetic act of retaliation, but we have to view it through Hannah's lens. When you are drowning in the middle of the ocean, someone stealing your tiny, deflated life preserver isn't.
It is an act of extreme cruelty.
Exactly. Feeling this tiny lifeline severed, Hannah retaliates. She writes Zach a highly vulnerable, intensely oversharing letter. She pours all of her mounting trauma onto the page, trying to force him to understand the disproportionate damage his petty theft has caused.
And on the tape, as she dictates her prosecution, Hannah says Zach read the letter in the hallway, looked her dead in the eye, crumpled it up, and threw it on the floor. She cites this cold, callous dismissal of her soul as one of the final straws that broke her will to live.
But the objective truth, that singularity of truth that we discussed earlier, is revealed in the present timeline. Zach never threw that letter away.
He kept it.
He kept it. He carries it in his wallet to this.
So why didn't he say anything? Why did he let her think?
Because he was a sheltered, immature 18-year-old boy faced with a terrifying outpouring of psychological pain from a girl he barely knew.
Out of his depth.
Completely. He wasn't malicious in that moment in the hallway. He was paralyzed. He had absolutely no emotional tools to process her complex trauma. He had no life experience in handling a severe mental health crisis, so he hid from it. He did nothing out of pure, unadulterated.
Mert KK points out the staggering, almost cruel hypocrisy here. The show uses this failure of communication to relentlessly condemn Zach. It isolates him with his guilt, treating him as a murderer by proxy.
He does.
It suggests he should have known exactly what to do, what to say, and how to save her. The show demands that we retroactively punish teenagers for not possessing the emotional maturity and crisis management skills of a seasoned 30-year-old clinical therapist.
The source highlights that the show aggressively wants Zach punished simply so Hannah can have the satisfying payoff of her final act. But Zach's mistake. It was a selfish, cowardly, petty mistake, yes, but an entirely understandable one for a high school.
If the entire thematic point of this media property is collective responsibility, empathy, and caring for each other's mental health, why is that empathetic treatment only afforded to the tragically beautiful, articulate victim, and not the deeply confused, struggling kids surrounding?
It establishes a dangerous paradigm where every bystander is held to an impossible standard of foresight, except the protagonist.
It's totally unbalanced.
It is.
Yeah.
And this failure of character empathy is precisely where the show begins its massive structural shift. It moves away from these grounded, recognizable, painful teenage miscommunications and starts leaning incredibly heavily into narrative.
Right. We are transitioning away from a show about the slow boil of high school into a gripping but increasingly absurd roller coaster of misery porn. We have to examine how the TV writer's room begins to sacrifice all of this nuanced character work simply to generate pure shock value.
Because to sustain a massive audience's attention for 13 hours of television, the writers clearly felt the grounded reality wasn't enough. They had to manufacture tragedy on a much larger, much less believable cinematic scale.
The relatable missteps turn into contrived explosions.
Precisely.
Let's analyze Cherie Holland. Reason number 10. She's at a party, and she offers to drive Hannah home because Hannah has been drinking. Now, it's ambiguous if Cherie is entirely sober herself, but they get in the car. On the drive, Cherie reaches down for a phone charger, takes her eyes off the road for 2 seconds, and knocks over a wooden stop sign at an intersection.
A very mundane mistake.
Right. They pull over. Hannah, acting completely erratically, melodramatically demands they call 911 immediately to report a broken piece of wood. Cherie, terrified of getting a DUI or just getting in trouble with her parents, panics and drives off, leaving Hannah on the side of the road.
A minor act of teenage cowardice fleeing the scene of property damage is then forced by the writers into a massive, fatal, mathematically improbable consequence.
Because the wooden sign is down, another student from their school, Jeff, happens to drive through that exact intersection later that night, gets T-boned by another car, and dies violently.
The timing is just absurd.
The scene of the crash is incredibly sad, but as Mert KK aggressively points out, it is wildly contrived. It's a random road accident weaponized by the plot to force crushing, murderous guilt onto Cherie.
A character who, up until that exact second, was portrayed as...
Exactly. It doesn't feel like a natural progression of the show's core theme about how we treat each other.
Yeah.
It feels like the writers looked at a whiteboard and decided they needed a body count to raise the stakes for episode 10.
It shifts the entire focus of the narrative from, how our small daily cruelties impact the mental health of others, to how a freak accident involving municipal signage makes you complicit in vehicular manslaughter.
It completely loses the thread.
It loses the thread of mental health higher. And this reliance on extreme sensational plot points infects almost every other storyline as the season drags on.
Take Courtney Crimson. She's terrified of being outed as gay to her peers. She has 2 gay fathers, and she fears the specific, vicious, homophobic bullying that would inevitably follow in this toxic school environment.
Which is a totally valid, grounded fear.
A completely real fear. But when a stalker, Tyler, leaks a photo of Courtney and Hannah kissing, the writers push Courtney into absurd cartoon villainy. To protect herself, she throws Hannah to the wolves, standing up in front of the school and loudly declaring that Hannah's the one in the photo, that Hannah coerced her, and that Hannah sleeps with everyone.
She actively participates in the destruction of Hannah to save herself.
Right. And speaking of Tyler, the student who actually took the photo, he is a character this show doesn't seem to have any coherent grasp on.
Tyler is a mess. Narratively.
Yes. He is taking photos of Hannah through her bedroom window at night with a telephoto lens.
Yeah.
He is an omnipresent, deeply terrifying threat. This is a severe criminal violation.
It is stalking. Full stop.
But the show bizarrely downplays the horror of this. It treats his stalking as a sad quirk of the weird, lonely AV club kid rather than a massive, terrifying psychological violation.
It places awkwardness almost for laughs in certain hallway scenes,
completely ignoring the sheer terror of what he is actually doing to Hannah. And then, in a massive, unearned leap designed purely for shock value, the finale implies he is stockpiling automatic weapons in a trunk and planning a mass school shooting.
It's a scattershot approach to trauma. Instead of deeply responsibly exploring 1 or 2 profound issues like the rumor mill or the stalk, the show starts frantically checking off a list of ultimate high school nightmares, regardless of whether they fit the character development or the overarching message.
It's just throwing darts at a board of trauma.
Exactly. It relies on the random chance of the stop sign, but it absolutely derails when it tries to personify this trauma. It stops relying on relatable missteps and just monster. This is where we get the character of Bryce.
Reason 12, Bryce Walker. The source material refers to him as a 2D frat boy Darth Vader.
It is a devastatingly accurate description of a structural narrative failure.
He has 0 characterization, none. His entire personality consists of immense, untouchable wealth, a smug smile, and pure, unadulterated evil.
There is no nuance, no backstory, no humanity.
He exists purely as a plot device to commit the most heinous acts imaginable, to propel the story to its darkest depths, culminating in the brutal sexual assault of both Jessica Davis while she is unconscious at a party, and later, Hannah Baker herself.
Which brings us to a very difficult point of analysis.
I have to pause and ask the most critical question of this entire deep dive. What does this narrative choice actually achieve? We have a scene where Hannah is at a party. By some wild, mathematically impossible coincidence, 50 teenagers instantly vanish from the backyard area, leaving her trapped alone in a hot tub with this cookie-cutter villain.
It feels like a horror movie setup, not a grounded drama.
Right. She tries to leave, he physically stops her, and the assault occurs. Does this deeply contrived scene actually teach the audience anything about the complex, terrifying reality of sexual assault? Or is it, as Mert KK suggests, just trauma porn designed to make the audience gasp?
If we evaluate this against the show's stated goal, which, again, was to start a dialogue and help people understand these issues, this portrayal is not just unhelpful, it is a missed educational opportunity of massive proportions.
Because it's too simplistic.
Because Bryce is so cartoonishly evil, so clearly marked as the bad guy, that no real-world abuser would ever watch him and see a reflection of their own behavior.
That's a great point. They would just think, well, I'm not a monster like that guy.
Exactly. They would say, I just push boundaries, I'm not a predator like Bryce. And conversely, no victim is going to find deep understanding in a scenario that relies on 50 people simultaneously vanished in a trap.
Our source argues that a far more impactful, infinitely more helpful dialogue would have been depicting betrayal by someone Hannah actually trusts, someone the audience trusted.
Precisely. If the assault had been perpetrated by a character she considered a friend, someone she let her emotional guard down, someone she invited in, who then slowly, methodically took advantage of her vulnerability and left her blaming herself, unsure if she was even legally allowed to call it abuse,
That would be devastating.
it would have demonstrated the devastating, murky complexity of real-world assault. It would have forced the audience to grapple with the betrayal of trust, which psychologists tell us is often the most enduring, damaging aspect of the trauma.
Instead, the show uses Bryce as a blunt instrument of undeniable villainy, purely for maximum shock value. It sacrifices educational nuance for the sake of making highly explosive, bingeable television.
It is storytelling that exploits trauma to keep you clicking next episode, rather than empowering the viewer to actually understand the issue.
And this obsession with narrative shock value reaches its absolute peak, and honestly, its most psychologically dangerous point, in how the show structures the concept of suicide itself. This is the core of the controversy. We have to analyze the after.
We are looking at the romanticization of what Mert KK brilliantly and darkly terms diet side.
Here's where it gets really interesting, where the psychology gets incredibly concerning. The show fundamentally breaks whatever grounded reality it had left by turning the ultimate irreversible act of self-harm into a deeply satisfying, meticulously planned, highly aesthetically pleasing revenge fantasy.
Let's break down the actual mechanics of the tapes themselves, the physical objects that drive.
When Clay, our protagonist, puts that first tape into his Walkman, Hannah's voice comes through the headphone. But it is not the voice of someone in the throes of a desperate final mental health crisis.
It is not raw.
No, it is delivered with this dry, detached, sarcastic tone. It's that cultural shorthand of quippy dialogue that undercuts the gravity of a situation, almost winking at the audience. She literally says into the microphone, "I bet you're wondering how I got here."
Like a Joss Whedon movie.
Exactly. And the audio quality is immaculate. As the source points out, it is crisp, studio-quality sound, completely devoid of background noise.
There is no hesitation in her voice, no hyperventilating, no raw, unfiltered agony of a dying girl. It is a deeply controlled, highly produced, almost theatrical form.
She displays an astonishing amount of showmanship. She artificially manufactures suspense for her listeners, cutting the tape right before revealing a name, treating her own trauma like a reality TV elimination round.
It's gamified.
Yes, she gamifies her own death. And what is the driving emotion behind this massive logistical undertaking? It isn't a search for peace. It isn't a tragic inability to cope with the pain. It is portrayed as pure, concentrated spite.
She leaves these intricate, agonizing puzzles for 13 people she labels as losers to solve.
She wants to make them sweat, to make them paranoid, to make them feel the full weight of their sins. And meanwhile, the show briefly notes that she leaves absolutely nothing, no note, no tape, no explanation, for her fiercely loving parents who are utterly, completely destroyed by finding her body.
This is where the psychological peril of the show's framework becomes glaringly, dangerously apparent. For a depressed, isolated teenager watching this at home in their bedroom, the show is actively validating their deepest, darkest revenge fantasy.
It's the ultimate "you'll miss me when I'm gone" daydream, brought to life with a massive Hollywood budget and beautiful cinematography. Hannah essentially transcends death in the narrative.
She doesn't just cease to exist, which is the reality of suicide.
Right, she becomes this omnipresent ghost. She becomes a minor deity who gets to sit back, completely safe from the pain of the physical world, and watch everything unfold perfectly according to her plan.
She gets to watch the school build elaborate, tearful shrines to her memory at her locker.
She gets to watch the people who wronged her unravel with guilt, and destroy their own lives. She gets to watch Clay wander the halls, looking tragically handsome, realizing she was perfect all along and that he is deeply in love with her.
The show makes a very specific, incredibly dangerous promise to the viewer. It promises that death will bring neat narrative closure. It promises profound catharsis.
It promises that by ending your life, you will finally become the absolute, undisputed center of everybody's universe.
It presents suicide as a temporary, elevated state of power and retribution completely and irresponsibly, ignoring the cold, permanent, unglamorous reality of actual death.
When you die, you're gone.
You do not get to enjoy the scheduled closure. You do not get to see the apologies. You do not get to watch the boy cry over.
By dressing the act up with pretty blue felt-tip pen numbers on vintage cassettes, soft-focus flashbacks where she looks flawless, and sarcastic voiceovers that make her sound smarter than everyone else in the room, they created a perfectly clean, beautiful, the ultimate aestheticization of tragedy.
And if the show deeply romanticizes the act of suicide itself, we must also critically examine the other side of the coin, what the narrative claims could have prevented. Because the messaging here regarding intervention is not just contradictory, it's actively, mathematically harmful to the concept of mental health.
We're talking about the savior complex and the scapegoat.
Yes.
The show places the ultimate burden of preventing Hannah's death on individuals who either couldn't possibly have known the full picture of her secret life or were actively, aggressively pushed away by Hannah herself when they tried to help.
Let's analyze the role of Clay Jensen, the primary lens through which the audience experienced the story. He is reason 11 on.
Though Hannah cruelly tells him on the recording that he doesn't actually belong on the list. He just needed to be on the tape so he would hear the whole story.
Which is an incredibly sadistic thing to do to a kid who is already spiraling into a nervous breakdown over your death.
Totally. But the overarching narrative of the show repeatedly implies that if Clay had just confessed his deep romantic feelings for Hannah, she would have been saved from her clinical depression.
The show has him replay this fantasy in his head where he tells her he loves her, they kiss, and her imagined ghost looks at him and asks, "Why didn't you say this to me when I was alive?"
The show lets Clay and the audience stew in the toxic belief that his lack of romantic courage cost a girl her life.
It pushes a deeply dangerous, highly romanticized savior complex. It suggests to the teenage viewer that the pure love of a good boy is the magical, instant cure for severe clinical depression and deep-rooted suicidal ideation.
It frames mental illness not as a complex medical and psychological condition, but as a lack of romance.
And it completely ignores the reality of their interactions.
Yes. Let's look at the actual flashbacks. When Clay does try to get physically and emotionally close to her at a party, Hannah, who is secretly suffering from the massive, unprocessed trauma of her recent assaults, has a severe panic attack.
She screams at him to get out.
She yells at him to leave her alone. She pushes him away aggressively. And when he respectfully complies with her explicit demand, respects her bodily autonomy, and leaves the room, she later complains on the tapes that he abandoned her when she needed him most.
It creates a completely unwinnable, highly toxic situation for the people trying to provide support. It suggests that victims bear absolutely no responsibility for communicating their pain or their...
while simultaneously demanding that their friends be omniscient mind readers who refuse to take no for an answer, which is its own form of toxic.
Exactly. Which brings us to the ultimate scapegoat of the entire... Mr. Porter, the school counselor. He is reason final.
This raises an important question, because the show uses the character of Mr. Porter as a stand-in for systemic institutional failure, right?
It attempts to critique the way schools handle mental health, but it tries to solve these massive, complex sociological issues in a single, highly compressed 60-minute television.
Hannah walks into his office on the last day of her life. She gives him incredibly cryptic, vague breadcrumbs about her distress. She says things like, Clay Jensen hates without any context.
And Mr. Porter logically points out that they hang out all the time. He doesn't immediately magically grasp the life or death gravity of the situation in the first 5 minutes of their conversation.
Right, when she finally vaguely mentions an assault without giving details, he clumsily suggests that maybe she consented and regretted it, or that if she won't name the boy, she needs to go to the police, but there's nothing.
It's obviously not great, empathetic counsel.
Not at all. She gets intensely frustrated by his lack of immediate understanding. She stands up and she walks out and he lets her.
She literally remarks on the tape recording, "If he fails, I will kill myself." She walks into that office with the decision seemingly already firmly made, almost looking for
one final adult failure to finalize her plan and justify the narrative of her tape.
But I have to push back incredibly hard on the show's internal logic here. It is staggering hypocrisy.
Oh, completely. How can Mr. Porter be burned at the stake by the narrative, held up to the audience as the ultimate failure who sealed her terrible fate, for missing the nuanced sign in a cryptic, guarded candid 5-minute conversation when Hannah's own adoring parents, her close friends, and Clay missed those exact same signs every single day for 2 years.
This raises an important question about the realistic expectations we place on mental health professionals versus the community at large. The source points out that Mr. Porter is only human.
The show even has him admit in a later scene that he only has cursory training. He isn't a specialized psychiatrist, he's an overworked high school guidance counselor.
The show explicitly pins the blame for her death on him for failing to take immediate, dramatic, forceful action to detain her, while giving a total thematic pass to a community and a family that was entirely blind to her downward spiral.
It's a disingenuous, highly compressed presentation of how mental health crises are actually identified and managed. It demands utter perfection from a single, under-resourced individual in a 5-minute window and calls that a systemic critique.
It's just not how the world works.
So we have completely torn apart the narrative flaws of this story. We've gone from the grounded, terrifying reality of the rumor mill directly into the contrived shock value of fatal stop signs, the dangerous romanticization of the afterlife, and the hypocritical blame game of the savior complex.
But here is the terrifying reality that we have to confront as consumers of media. This isn't just a story.
Yeah.
This isn't just an intellectual exercise in literary critique or pointing out plot holes on YouTube.
Exactly. When a piece of media explicitly claims its overarching mission is to start a dialogue and help people in crisis, as the creators of this show aggressively, repeatedly did in every interview, we must judge it on its real-world impact. We cannot evaluate it solely as art. We have to look at the measurable physical consequences it had on the population.
And the tragic fallout of this series is heavily documented. It is not hypothetical. It is not a jest.
The National Association of School Psychologists, the NASP, a massive professional body, had to actively issue widespread warnings to schools and parents against the show.
They explicitly stated that vulnerable youth should not.
Why? Because they knew that the powerful, highly produced storytelling could lead to impressionable viewers developing their own revenge fantasy and romanticizing the permanent choices made by the fictional characters.
They recognized exactly what our source pointed out regarding the diet. The show completely failed to provide trustworthy adult figures to model healthy behavior, and it presented suicide not as a tragedy, but as a highly effective communication to get exactly what hurt you.
And the data, the cold hard number, backed up their deepest fears.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring you back to the statistic I dive with.
The spike in mortality.
Yes. A peer-reviewed study published in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry reported a staggering 28.9% increase in suicide among Americans aged 10 to 17 in the month following the show's debut on the streaming platform. Let that sink in.
It's hard to process.
Think about the scale of that tragedy. A nearly 30% spike in adolescent suicide, mathematically tied to the release of a bingeable television show.
It is a devastating, sobering statistic that completely shatters the defense that this was just entertainment or that it successfully raised awareness.
Awareness that leads to a 30% spike in mortality is a failure. The show measurably negatively impacted public health on a national.
So how did the massive multi-billion-dollar corporation behind this, Netflix, respond to this public health crisis and monetize?
With what Mert KK describes as cynical, entirely superficial attempts to clean up the mess years too late, purely to protect their brand image.
We have to examine these retroactive fixes.
Let's talk about the infamous bathtub scene. Originally, the first season ended with a completely silent, intensely graphic, harrowing 3-minute scene of Hannah taking her own life in her bathroom.
It was notoriously hard to watch.
Extremely. The creator of the show, Brian Yorkie, initially defended this creative choice vehemently in the press. He claimed that showing the terrible, ugly, physically painful reality of the act was absolutely necessary to avoid glorifying.
He argued that sanitizing the death by cutting away would be the real danger because it would make it look easy.
But as our source critically observed, understanding the psychology to the viewer proved the creator wrong. The romanticization of the act did not happen in the final 3 minutes in the bathtub. The romanticization happened long before that scene ever aired.
It happened in the premise.
It happened with the crisp, sarcastic tapes. It happened with the beautiful lighting. It happened with the omnipresent ghost watching her classmates mourn her at her locker.
You cannot spend 12.5 hours making suicide look like a highly empowering, deeply satisfying revenge fantasy where you become a god among your peers and then expect 3 minutes of graphic physical horror to magically undo that deep psychological.
The brain of a depressed teenager doesn't work that way. You just end up traumatizing the viewers who have spent 12 hours leaning into the fantasy.
And so 2 full years after the show was was originally released. 2 years. 2 years later, after millions of vulnerable people had already binge-watched it, after the statistical spike in youth mortality had already occurred and been documented, Netflix quietly scrubbed the graphic scene platform.
It just edited it out as if it never existed.
2 years too late.
And to cover their bases, they slapped on some generic trigger warnings at the start of the episode, and a pre-episode disclaimer with the attractive cast out of character, looking somber, telling you to reach out for help.
And pointing you to a specific URL, 13reasonswhy.info.
And this is where the corporate cynicism becomes completely undeniable and, frankly, deeply disturbing. Our source, RTKK, actually went to that website to see what kind of robust mental health infrastructure Netflix had built with their billions of dollars.
And what did they find?
13reasonswhy.info simply redirects you to a generic corporate site called wannatalkabout.com.
Okay.
And what do you find when you get there? A robust crisis center. You find a low-effort WordPress site that literally acts as a digital billboard for other Netflix properties.
You have to be kidding me.
I wish I was. You click on the tab for mental health resources, and instead of immediate, highly visible crisis hotlines taking center stage, you are advertised the Marilyn Monroe biopic Blonde, or you are shown a promotional roundtable interview for the Mila Kunis thriller Luckiest Girl Alive.
When a massive corporation weaponizes the most extreme forms of mental health trauma for binge watchability and immense subscriber profit, and then, in the face of a documented public health crisis, slaps a flimsy redirected URL on the screen that functions as a cross-promotional marketing tool for their other movies.
While claiming the moral high ground.
Exactly. It is a profound, inexcusable betrayal of the vulnerable audience it claims to be protecting.
It is the ultimate undeniable proof that the dialogue they claimed they desperately wanted to start was strictly a dialogue about subscribing to their service and keeping your eyes glued to their app.
If we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, the journey of this narrative is stark trouble.
We started by acknowledging the show's surprisingly accurate, deeply felt depiction of the slow boil of high school bullying, the terrifying mechanics of the rumor mill, the weaponization of innocent vulnerability, the crushing, inescapable power of a cemented reputation.
But then we watched, point by point, as that grounded reality descended into contrived, highly produced shock value. We saw the writer sacrifice nuanced, helpful conversations about trauma and recovery for 2D frat boy villains and fatal car crashes meant to keep you clicking next episode.
We saw how it dangerously romanticized the aftermath of suicide, transforming a final, tragic, lonely act into a beautifully lit, highly produced revenge fantasy where the victim gets to be the omniscient, all-powerful judge of their peers.
And finally, we witnessed the grim, mathematical, real-world fallout and a multi-billion-dollar corporation's cynical, hollow attempts to sweep the collateral damage under a rug woven entirely from promotional links to other.
So why does all of this matter to you, the listener? Why spend an hour deeply dissecting the structural flaws of a teen drama from years ago? Because you are constantly, every single day, consuming media that tackles heavy, sensitive, life-altering topics.
You're swimming in it.
When you were sitting on your couch, watching that gripping narrative unfold, when you were pulled in by the beautiful cinematography, the attractive actors, and the swelling emotional soundtrack, it is absolutely vital that you train yourself to look past the surface.
You must critically examine the underlying mechanics of the psychological message being sold to you.
Being truly well-informed in the modern age means recognizing exactly when your empathy, your natural, beautiful, human desire to care for a suffering protect, is being actively, cynically manipulated for engagement algorithms and subscribers.
It is about actively demanding better from the storytellers who shape our cultural understanding of mental health. It is about refusing to passively accept trauma porn, disguised as a noble public service.
Which leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought, something for you to mull over long after you take your headphones off today. We have seen the data. We know, without a shadow of a doubt, that media has the proven measurable power to increase self-harm through reckless, aesthetically pleasing negative portrayal.
The storytelling machine is incredibly powerful, and the radiation it emits absolutely affects the body.
So if the dark reflection is mathematically true, if media can demonstrably harm a population at scale, we must ask, what is the inverse?
What would a piece of entertainment look like that uses those exact same gripping, binge-worthy storytelling mechanics? The intense cliffhangers, the deep, relatable character investments, the massive emotional resonance to trigger a measurable decrease in adolescent isolation.
Is it even possible to write a genuinely compelling, commercially successful, viral teen drama that actually heals its audience without fundamentally weaponizing their trauma to keep them watching?
It is the ultimate challenge for the next generation of storytellers and executives. What happens when a television show that is, created specifically to save lives, actually ends up handing ammunition directly to victim blamers?
Right. It is a staggering question.
It really is. Today, we are looking at what might be one of the biggest media failures of the streaming era. We are doing a full autopsy on the mechanics of serialized television, the ethics of representation, and that incredibly dangerous line between raising awareness and exploiting trauma.
Yeah, and it's a very thin line.
So thin.
Yeah.
So welcome to the deep dive. For this one, we have a feature-length breakdown in front of us from the YouTube creator mertkk, and it is this meticulous, scene-by-scene analysis of the really polarizing second season of the teen drama 13 Reasons Why.
It is a phenomenal piece of media criticism, truly. And, before we really get into the architecture of where this show succeeded and where it, frankly, spectacularly collapsed, we need to set some firm ground rules for the terrain we are walking into today.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to.
Because of the inherent nature of the series we're analyzing, the material deals with intensely heavy, deeply sensitive reality. So for you listening at home, please be aware that we're going to be discussing narratives around suicide, sexual assault, drug abuse, and school violence.
Right. And just to be completely clear on our end, our role here isn't to take some sort of moral high ground, We aren't here to act as the arbiters of what is quote-unquote good or bad art. We are acting as impartial guides through this specific video essay. We're examining the structural choices the showrunners made, like how does a director block a scene to make us feel a certain way?
Exactly.
Or how does a writer's room function when they are told to stretch a finished story into a multi-year franchise?
That distinction is crucial. We are strictly analyzing the mechanics of the storytelling. And, if you're listening to this right now thinking, I haven't even watched a single episode of this show, why would I care about an analysis of its second season?
Which is a totally fair question.
Totally fair. But the answer is that this is a masterclass in the social contract between a creator and an audience. When a piece of media explicitly positions itself to the global public as an educational tool for real-world epidemic, what happens when the demands of bingeable, algorithm-driven drama collide with the ethical responsibility of that education?
Okay, let's unpack this, because the foundation of this entire critique rests on a paradox that the show creates for itself before the actual narrative begins.
Right, from minute one.
I remember seeing this when it aired. You hit play on the first episode, and you get the actors completely out of character, standing in front of the camera, delivering a public service.
Yeah, they establish that pedagogical contract immediately. The actors literally look into the lens and state that 13 Reasons Why is a fictional series tackling real-world issues, and they explicitly list sexual assault, substance abuse, and suicide.
Right.
And then they use a very specific phrase. They say that by shedding a light on difficult topics, they hope to help viewers start a conversation.
Shedding a light? That just feels like such a heavy burden to place on a teen drama.
It is the crucible for the entire video essay we are exploring today. If a television show introduces itself as a vital educational tool, it completely alters the rubric by which we are allowed to judge. You are no longer just asking, hey, is the dialogue snap or are the plot twists surprising? You are forced to ask, is this actually teaching what it claims to teach? Is the light they are shedding illuminating a hidden truth, or are they just, using a flashlight to create spooky shadows for a cheap jump scare?
Wow.
mertkk's central thesis is that the show suffers from a massive identity crisis. It's constantly ping-ponging between wanting the prestige and cultural importance of a serious PSA and needing the frantic cliffhanger pacing of a soapy teen melodrama.
Wait, I need to push back on this a little bit because it feels like a bit of a trap.
Okay, go ahead.
Isn't it inherently unfair to judge a piece of serialized entertainment by the standards of a health textbook?
Mm-hmm.
Like, think about an action movie. Let's say a famous director goes on a press tour and says, we hired the world's leading physicist to make sure the gravity in our movie is perfectly accurate, and we hope this starts a conversation about astrophysics.
Right.
That sounds great on a talk show, but eventually the hero has to jump out of a helicopter without a parachute, grab a falling briefcase, and survive an explosion.
Yeah, of course.
Eventually, they're going to break the laws of physics because they need the audience to eat their popcorn and cheer. You can't have a summer blockbuster without breaking gravity. So, I guess my question is, can you realistically have a compelling multi-season drama without eventually breaking the complex reality of trauma?
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it honestly gets to the very heart of the problem. It is incredibly difficult, perhaps impossible, to sustain that realism indefinitely in a corporate television.
Yeah, there are just too many episodes.
Exactly. But the difference between your action movie and this drama is the collateral damage of the broken promise. If an action movie breaks the laws of physics, nobody is harmed. Nobody walks out of the theater and tries to jump out of a helicopter because they think they'll bounce.
Right, because we know it's a spectacle.
Exactly. We know it's fake. But when a show looks vulnerable, young people in the eye and says, we are portraying severe depression and addiction accurately to help you, and then turns around and uses those profound human struggles as cheap narrative bait to ensure you click next episode, the failure isn't just clumsy art.
Oh, I see what you mean.
The failure becomes actively detrimental to the cause it champions. It warps the public's understanding of how these issues actually work.
That makes a lot of sense. The stakes of the promise are just astronomically higher.
Precisely.
And, to be completely fair to the show's massive ambition, the video essay doesn't just launch into a massive teardown right away. Merc KK actually dedicates significant time to exploring the areas where the show undeniably did in its mission.
Yes, there are some genuine triumphs early on.
There are these rare, shining moments where the writers actually manage to balance gripping television with the cold, unvarnished realities of the world.
And the most compelling example of that balance centers on the character of Mr. Porter, the high school guidance counselor.
Talk about an incredible 180-degree turn for a character. I mean, in the first season, he is Yuri.
Infuriating, but highly realistic, unfortunately. In season 1, Mr. Porter is the ultimate embodiment of institutional self-preservation. When Hannah Baker comes to him in her final, most desperate moment, dropping clear signs of profound distress and hinting at an assault, he leans back in his chair and essentially tells her she needs to move on.
Yeah, he completely minimizes her pain.
He does it to protect the status quo of the school. He's the adult who failed. But in season 2, the essay praises how the writers force him to confront that failure. He enters this phase of pure, raw atonement.
He goes completely rogue. It is wild to watch. He realizes that the school administration is still doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, hiring lawyers, dodging subpoenas.
Right. They are prioritizing their public relations over the safety of the students. So instead of playing along, he basically becomes a vigilante guidance counselor. He crosses massive, fireable professional lines. There's that scene where he physically pins Bryce, the wealthy student who is the central predator of the narrative. He pins him against a wall, and he starts showing up uninvited at the homes of at-risk students, confronting their neglectful parents in their own living room.
The analysis of his arc is fascinating because it taps into a very specific cultural desire. Merc KK argues that Mr. Porter's season 2 arc is the ultimate fantasy of institutional accountability.
Fantasy is definitely the right word for it.
Because in reality, when large systems, whether it's a school district, a corporation, or a church, when they fail vulnerable people, the adults in charge almost universally retreat behind non-disclosure agreements, legal teams, and carefully worded press statements.
Yeah, you never see them admit fault.
It is incredibly rare to see someone in power break rank. So, Mr. Porter represents the deeply cathartic fantasy of the adult who finally snaps, looks at the broken system, and says, I failed. This institution is corrupt, and I am going to burn my own career to the ground to make this right.
And the culmination of that arc is his testimony in court. The essay highlights the sheer visceral power of the acting here by Derek. It's not that sanitized Hollywood version of sadness,
Right, where a stoic man lets a single perfect tear roll down his cheek.
Exactly. It is ugly, hyperventilating, soul-breaking sobbing on the witness stand. He completely implicates himself. He refuses the lifeline his own lawyer tries to throw him.
And there's a real-world consequence to that scene that the video essay documents, which is incredibly telling about our culture.
Well, the Discord story, right?
Yes. Merc KK mentions watching that specific courtroom scene while on a Discord stream with a group of friends. And during this moment of intense, raw vulnerability from a male character, one of the people on the stream blurts out a derogatory slur, calling Mr. Porter weak for crying.
Wow. I mean, proving the necessity of the scene in real time.
Precisely. The essay immediately points out that this knee-jerk reaction, mocking a man for displaying agonizing grief, is the exact toxic, emotionally suppressive culture the show is trying to dismantle.
Yeah.
It proves why we need to see men breaking down in media without it being framed as a loss of dignity. And, it's not a fairy tale ending for him either.
Yeah.
Because he refuses to absolve the school district, he's fired.
Right, there are actual consequences.
In his final scene, he hands the principal a thick stack of files containing the names of other students who are quietly slipping through the cracks, begging the administration to finally pay it.
Yeah.
And the prince cold.
It's a devastatingly realistic, and that commitment to cold, hard reality brings us to the other major success story the essay identifies, which is the arc of Jessica.
Jessica's storyline is arguably the most vital educational component of the season. She is attempting to return to the high school ecosystem after surviving a horrific assault by Bryce. And the writers do not sugarcoat the hostility of that environment for a second.
No, they don't. The victim blaming she endures is visceral. Because her assailant is wealthy, popular, and protected by the school's athletic infrastructure, he has had weeks to control the narrative before she even steps foot back in the hallway.
He's already poisoned the well.
Exactly. The whispers are everywhere. He has planted the idea that it was consensual or that she initiated it while intoxicated.
The show captures the insidious nature of high school rumor mills perfect. There's a particular moment highlighted in the analysis that is incredibly difficult to watch, but profoundly important. Someone takes photographs of Jessica simply existing at a school dance, perfectly mundane photos of her smiling.
Yeah, just totally normal pictures.
Right. And they deface them with paint, scrawling the words, "Who would trust a drunk slut?" and then publicly hang them up for the entire student body to see. It is a stark, unblinking look at how survivors are terrorized into silence.
And the culmination of her arc, much like Mr. Porter's, happens in the courtroom. Jessica finally summons the immense courage to take the stand and testify against Bryce. And then Justin Foley, a character who was in the room and complicit as a bystander during the assault, he also finally steps up and testifies, confirming her story.
Right.
You watch this and you think, okay, the truth is out, the evidence is there, the dramatic tension has peaked, so now we get the triumphant music and the bad guy gets locked away forever.
But that isn't what happened. And this is where the essay deeply praises the show's restraint and its commitment to its PSA mission.
It's such a gut punch.
It really is. The wealthy, well-connected predator, Bryce, is found guilty, but is sentenced to a mere 3 months of probation. Meanwhile, Justin, the homeless bystander who finally did the right thing by testifying, is sentenced to a month in juvenile detention, followed by 6 months of probation.
I mean, let that sink in. The homeless bystander receives a significantly harsher punishment than the wealthy rapist.
The video essayist points out that while this outcome is profoundly frustrating for an audience looking for justice, it is exemplary educational television.
Yeah, because it's real.
Exactly. It demonstrates the brutal reality that the justice system is rarely a level playing field. It is a machine that frequently protects wealth, social standing, and institutional prestige at the direct expense of victims. It doesn't give the audience the easy catharsis they want. It gives them the infuriating truth they need to see.
Which perfectly transitions into a subplot that I actually found really confusing when I first thought about it, but the video essay unpacks it brilliantly. We really need to talk about...
Oh, Nina is a phenomenal character study in the complexities of survival.
She really is. She is a character Jessica meets in a support group for survivors of sexual assault. And Nina's entire philosophy is compartmentalization. She explicitly states that she refuses to let her trauma become her defining personality.
Right.
She is dating a guy on the track team, and she has absolutely no intention of telling him what happened to her. She just wants to lock that box, put it on a shelf, and move forward with a normal high school experience.
Which is incredibly common.
Yeah, but Jessica, who is in a very different stage of her journey, is constantly pushing Nina, projecting her own needs onto her. Jessica implies that true healing can only happen through radical transparency and confidence.
And the essay is very careful to point out that Jessica's in the wrong. Nobody's entitled to demand that a survivor process their trauma on a specific timeline or in a publicly permitted way.
Right.
If Nina survives by compartmentalizing, that is her right. But the writing takes this valid coping mechanism and pushes it to an incredibly messy, complex extreme at the end of the season.
Right, the Polaroid. Throughout the season, there is this looming threat of physical evidence. A box of Polaroid photographs taken inside the baseball team's clubhouse.
The most crucial piece of evidence.
Exactly. These photos are undeniable. Photographic proof of multiple young women being assaulted while unconscious. It is the holy grail for the prosecution. If these photos see the light of day, the entire toxic culture of the school is dismantled. And Nina finds the box. And what does she do? She takes the photo, sits in front of a fire, and burns every single...
She orchestrates the destruction of the case. And Merc KK dives into the psychological motivation behind this act. Like, why would a survivor destroy the mechanism of justice?
It seems so counterintuitive.
It does. But the essay theorizes that Nina looked at those photos and saw herself, perhaps smiling in a different context before an assault, or looking compliant while incapacitated. She knows exactly how a cynical defense attorney would weaponize those images.
Oh, they would tear her apart.
Completely. They'd be blown up on a projector in a courtroom. They would be leaked online. The victims would be dissected, judged, and humiliated all over again. Nina burns them because she desperately wants to retain control over her own narrative. She refuses to let her deepest violation become a public spectacle for a jury to debate.
But the irony, the devastating irony here, is that by making that choice to protect herself, she completely strips the agency away from every other victim in that box.
Yes.
She unilaterally decides that none of them will get their day in court. In her desperation to avoid being victimized by the legal system, she actively re-victimizes her peers.
What's fascinating here is how the source recognizes this isn't bad writing, but wonderfully frustrating character writing. It isn't a plot hole. It isn't a contrivance. It is organic. It teaches the audience that trauma responses are not always noble, and they certainly aren't always helpful to the collective good.
No, they can be really
Extremely messy. Sometimes a person in immense pain makes a deeply selfish, destructive choice out of sheer self-preservation. It is human and authentic.
It's the kind of writing that genuinely starts the nuanced conversations the show promised. And honestly, if the entire second season operated with that level of psychological respect for its characters, we would be talking massive.
Really would be.
But the essay argues that while Mr. Porter, Jessica, and Nina evolved naturally based on the events of the first season, other characters were subjected to arcs that felt incredibly manufactured. The writers hit a wall. And this plunges us into what we can call the muddled middle of Zen, where the gears of the television machine start grinding against the educational man.
The muddled middle is where the structural demands of episodic television begin to cannibalize the reality of the character. We see the writers struggling to maintain momentum for characters whose natural storylines have essentially resolved or plateaued. And the most glaring example of this structural failure is the character of Alex Stanton.
Let's look at how Alex is positioned, because it's a very heavy arc. At the end of the first season, overwhelmed by guilt, Alex attempts suicide. He survives, but he sustains a severe traumatic. So in season 2, he returns to school dealing with profound physical and cognitive limitations.
Right, he has memory loss, his motor skills are significantly impaired, and he requires a cane to walk.
Now, from an educational standpoint, portraying the grueling, lifelong aftermath of a suicide attempt is a brave and necessary choice.
It is.
But the essay critiques how the writers actually utilize him within the machinery of the plot. Because his physical limitations prevent him from participating in the fast-paced detective work or the hallway confrontation, the writers essentially sideline.
Instead of giving him a dynamic, internal arc about recovery and acceptance, they relegate him to the role of an omniscient narrator. Mert KK calls him the writer's stand-in.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels.
He just floats through the background of scene, possessing this serene, almost enlightened self-awareness, occasionally delivering moral judgments that the audience already knows to be true.
He becomes completely detached from the actual tension of the story. And to really illustrate how clunky this gets when the writers try to force him back into the action, the video essay breaks down this incredibly bizarre sequence in the desert.
Oh, the scene.
It's so strange. There is a character named Monty who has become the new primary physical threat of the show. He is violently harassing students to terrify them out of tests. The writers need a scene where someone stands up to Monty, but the blocking and the logic of the scene they wrote for Alex makes absolutely no sense.
Not at all.
Alex drives his black Jeep out into a deserted area, slowly steps out of the vehicle. He has his cane in one hand because he physically struggles to hold his own body weight, and he is holding a handgun in his other, and he attempts to aggressively threaten Monty to back.
The video essay dismantles the mechanics of this scene perfectly. Tension in a thriller relies on capability. If a character makes a threat, the audience has to believe they possess the physical or psychological capacity to follow through.
Right.
But in this scenario, the audience and Monty know for an absolute fact that Alex has heavily compromised motor functions and zero reflex. He is severely disabled. He is driven to a remote location with no backup to threaten a highly volatile, violent athlete.
It feels exactly like a glitch in a video game. Have you ever been playing a high-stakes stealth game and the enemy AI just bugs out?
Oh, yeah.
Like an enemy gets stuck walking into a wall, just endlessly marching in place. The moment that happens, all the fear and tension evaporate. You just sit back and watch the broken mechanic. That is exactly what this scene feels like. The audience looks at the screen and thinks, well, the writers wanted a cool Western-style standoff in the desert, but they didn't have a character who logically fit the scenario, so they just forced Alex into the blocking anyway.
It shatters the immersion completely because the logic of the world breaks down.
It is sloppy X. But when the video essay transitions from Alex to the character of Justin Foley, the critique shifts from sloppy television writing to a much deeper ethical failure regarding the show's educational claims.
Justin's situation is incredibly dark. He is essentially an unhoused youth hiding from his mother's dangerously abusive boyfriend living on the street. And to cope with the trauma and the physical reality of his situation, he develops a severe heroin addiction.
Portraying opioid addiction in a show aimed at teenagers is an immense responsibility.
Massive.
But the essay argues that the writers abandon the clinical reality of in favor of high-octane soap opera trope. They rely on the visual shorthand of addiction rather than the agonizing internal process.
Mert KK points out that the show's depiction of heroin use is basically a highlight reel of dramatic outbursts. We get scenes where Justin comedically vomits on someone's shoes to show he's dope sick, followed almost immediately by massive high-stakes relapses that occur the second he encounters a minor emotional inconvenience.
Right.
He'll have a stressful conversation in a hallway, and 5 minutes later, he is actively using again.
To understand why this is such a failure, We have to look at the neurological reality of addiction, which the show ignores. Recovery from opioid dependency isn't just about sweating out the physical withdrawal. It is a profound rewiring of the brain's reward centers.
It takes so much time.
It involves intense anhedonia, lethargy, and a grueling non-linear process of 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. It requires immense empathy from a support nav, but the pacing of episodic television demands immediate dramatic payoff.
And that's where the damage is done. Because if you are a 15-year-old watching this and you have zero real-world experience with how addiction actually operates, this hyper-compressed timeline completely warps your empathy.
It really does.
When Justin instantly relapses every single time you feel stressed, he doesn't look like a sick person battling a complex physiological disease. He just looks incredibly selfish. He looks like a guy who is actively choosing to betray the friends trying to hide him because he had a bad afternoon and wanted to get home.
The pacing demonizes the ad. By prioritizing the need for a shocking cliffhanger at the end of an episode over slow, frustrating, often boring reality of recovery, the show accidentally reinforces the exact societal stigma it claims, man.
Exactly.
It teaches the audience that addicts are simply weak-willed and untrustworthy rather than medicamized.
So at this point in this season, we have clunky scenes with Alex, and we have the reliance on tired tropes with Justin. If that was the extent of the problem, we might just categorize Season 2 as a slightly disappointing follow-up.
Right, just a sophomore slump.
But here is where the structural integrity of the narrative completely collapsed. Because to generate new mysteries for a second season, the writers couldn't just rely on the aftermath of Season 1. They realized they didn't have enough plot, so they had to actively go back and rewrite the past.
We are entering the territory of the retcon.
Yeah, the retcon contagion.
Yeah. For anyone listening who is unfamiliar with the term, a retcon is retroactive continuity. It's when a writer adds new information to a story that fundamentally changes how past events. To use an analogy, imagine you hire a contract house. You agree on the blueprints, they pour a solid concrete foundation, and they build a beautiful...
Okay.
A year later, you tell the contractor you want to add a massive underground swimming pool directly beneath the living room. The contractor says, we can't do that, the foundation is already set. And you say, just start digging and pretend the pool was always supposed to.
Oh, wow.
What happens? You pull out the wrong load-bearing brick, the foundation cracks, and the entire house collapses on itself. That is exactly what a retcon does to a serialized narrative.
That is a perfect visualization of the mechanical risk. When an audience watches a first season, they enter into a psychological contract with the creators. They accept the events presented on screen as the foundational truth of that fictional universe. When writers start aggressively altering that foundation simply to prop up the runtime of a second season, they don't just risk confusing the audience, they risk breaking that trust entirely.
Yeah.
And Mert KK identifies 3 massive retcons in this season that completely warp the reality of the show.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's start with the character of Zach Dempsey, because this one gave me actual whiplash.
Oh, it's wild.
If you recall Season 1, Zach is presented as a fairly simple archetype. He is an emotionally stunted athlete who awkwardly tries to comfort Hannah in the cafeteria, gets rebuffed because he doesn't know how to communicate, and retaliates by pettily stealing compliment notes out of her paper bag in class.
Right, that was the whole conflict.
It was a story about microaggressions and missed connections. That was the entirety of their dynamic. But in Season 2, Zach takes the witness stand in court and reveals a massive, earth-shattering...
He testifies that he and Hannah actually engaged in a secret, highly intimate, summer-long romantic and sexual relationship.
What?
He claims they lost their virginity to each other. He says they spent weeks deeply entwined, sharing secrets and exchanging hundreds of text messages away from the eyes of the rest of the school.
Wait, how does a show just invent a whole summer romance out of thin air? I mean, Hannah spent hours recording 13 incredibly detailed cassette tapes, documenting every minor slight, every stolen note, every awkward conversation that contributed to her feeling isolated and hopeless.
Every little detail.
But we are supposed to believe she completely omitted a deeply loving, summer-long sexual relationship with one of the people featured on those tapes.
The video essay rightfully points out how entirely logic-defying this choice. From a mechanical standpoint, we know exactly why this happened. The writers looked at their whiteboard for Season 2, realized they needed Zach to have a deeper emotional stake in the trial to generate drama, and so they simply invented a past to accommodate that need.
Just pasted it in.
But by doing so, they fundamentally contradict the entire premise of the first season. The tragedy of Hannah Baker was her profound, suffocating isolation. She believed nobody truly saw her or cared for her. If she actually spent the summer before her death in a loving, communicative relationship, her overwhelming sense of total alienation makes significantly less sense. The new foundation cracks the old house.
And they don't stop with Zach. They do the exact same thing to the character of Ryan Shaver. Ryan was the pretentious poetry editor. In season 1, his crime was stealing an incredibly ambiguous emotional poem from Hannah's private journal and publishing it in the school zine without her consent. The poem was full of metaphor. It was sad, but it wasn't a suicide. The tragedy was that the school counselors and the students read it and missed the subtle warning signs hiding.
But in season 2, Ryan is brought to the stand, and he suddenly produces other poems, entirely new pieces of writing that were never mentioned or hinted at in the first season. And in these new, retroactively inserted poems, Hannah isn't using metaphor at all. She is explicitly, directly stating her intention.
KK shows the text of the new poems in the video. She writes lines like, "I may be ugly, but at least I'm alive," and talks openly about screaming inside and wanting. It completely obliterates the dynamic of the first season.
It really does.
In season 1, the adults failed because the signs of depression were quiet and easy to miss. We weren't looking. In season 2, Ryan is holding a piece of paper where she is basically shouting her intentions through a megaphone, and he just sits on.
It changes the narrative from, society struggles to identify internal pain to this specific character maliciously ignored a blatant cry for help.
Oh.
And the essay argues they made this change purely to give the rival lawyers in the courtroom scenes a new piece of evidence to argue over.
Wow, just for a courtroom scene.
They sacrificed the thematic resonance of the first season for 5 minutes of procedural dialogue. But perhaps the most complex and debated retcon involves Bryce Walker, the central antagonist.
This one is incredibly tricky to navigate because in season 1, Bryce is portrayed with almost zero redeeming or humanizing qualities. He operates like a pure sociopathic predator. He takes what he wants with cold, terrifying detachment. He is essentially a monster in a Letterman jacket.
Yeah, just pure evil.
But the essay notes that in season 2, we get these newly invented flashbacks showing a different dynamic. We see that Bryce and Hannah acting out socially, they drove around his neighborhood together, and the show reveals that Bryce actually developed genuine, albeit twisted romantic for her.
The flashback shows him making a clumsy, emotional pass, and Hannah firmly, actively rejects. She tells him no, and the camera lingers on his reaction. He looks out of the water, and you see his ego frack. He is visibly bitter, embarrassed, and angry. The retcon changes him from a detached sociopath into a deeply spoiled, entitled teenager who ultimately assaults Hannah specifically because his fragile ego cannot process the fact that she actively rejected his affection.
Now, KK actually argues in the video that this is, in a vacuum, a good retcon. It retroactively makes his crime more psychologically grounded. It highlights a very real, very prevalent danger in the real world. The danger of the nice guy who believes he is inherently owed affection and who turns violently retaliatory the moment a woman says no.
It is a vastly more realistic and culturally relevant profile of a sexual predator. Most assaults are not committed by cartoonish monsters. They are committed by entitled people within the victim's social circle. However, as the essay profoundly notes, this brilliant characterization highlights the failure of the writers. They desperately needed that nuance in season 1 when the assault was the focal point of the narrative. Wedging it in now, after the audience has already categorized Bryce as a one-dimensional villain, feels less like character development and more like the writers frantically plugging holes in a sinking ship.
Think about this dynamic in Europe. Have you ever had a friend come to you deeply upset and tell you a really intense, emotional story about a massive fight they had with a partner? You listen, you empathize, you take their side completely.
Sure.
But then, a month later, they retell the same story to someone else, and suddenly they keep adding massive, context-shifting details. Like, oh yeah, and before he yelled at me, I actually threw a plate at his head. Or, oh, I forgot to mention we were secretly broken up at the time. What happens to your empathy?
It evaporates.
Exactly. You stop trusting the storyteller. You start wondering if the original pain they shared was even authentic, or if they are just manipulating the facts for attention.
That is precisely the catastrophic danger of relying on retcons in a trauma narrative. Breaking audience trust is a critical failure. If the audience cannot trust that the events on screen are the truth, they cannot emotionally invest in the outcome.
It's so true.
But KK argues that the show didn't just stop at breaking the audience's trust through clumsy writing. The video essay alleges that in their desperate bid to keep viewers hooked, the showrunners crossed a definitive, unforgivable ethical line. They moved from portraying trauma into actively exploiting it for cheap shock value.
And this brings us to the most intense and frankly deeply disturbing critiques in the entire video essay, centering around the characters of Chloe and Tyler. Let's look at Chloe first, because the handling of her storyline is a masterclass in how directorial framing can betray a narrative.
Chloe is introduced in season 2 as the new head cheerleader, and she quickly becomes Bryce's new girlfriend. The video essay actually starts by heavily praising the initial writing of Herb's.
Yeah, it starts off strong.
The show methodically depicts how Bryce slowly, almost imperceptible, erodes her bound. It is not portrayed as a single, sudden, violent attack. It is a slow, psychological chipping away of her autonomy. He isolates her, manipulates her self-worth, and conditions her until she is trapped in a mental daze, unable to even cognitively recognize that she is being repeatedly assaulted by the boy who claims to love her.
It captures that terrifying psychological control perfectly. Eventually, the facade cracks. She realizes the truth. She agrees to testify against him in court. And crucially, she is in possession of the Polaroids, the physical proof that he assaulted her while she was unconscious. Stage is set. She walks into the courtroom. She takes the stand. The lawyers ask the question.
She changes her mind.
She changes her mind, lies under oath, and protects her abuser.
And we must be clear, from a psychological standpoint, a victim recanting their testimony at the last second is a tragically realistic outcome. Victims of severe, prolonged manipulation frequently fail to testify out of pure, paralyzing terror, psychological conditioning, or the belief that the system won't protect them from retaliation.
Right, that happens all the time.
The ethical failure here is not the plot point itself. The ethical failure, as Mert KK meticulously points out, is the direction and the framing of the scene.
Exactly. I mean, how do you shoot a scene of a traumatized girl breaking under pressure? You put the camera close to her face, you show her hands trembling, you might mute the audio slightly to simulate the ringing in her ears associated. You frame her as a terrified survivor cornered by an impossible situation. But that is not what the director does here.
No, the essay points out that the actress is directed to deliver this lie not with a trembling voice, but with a calculated, almost smug demeanor. The camera angles, the lighting, and the musical cues, the entire cinematic vocabulary of the scene, are designed to frame her as a conniving accomplice delivering a massive, gasp-inducing plot twist.
Mert KK is visibly furious in the essay at this point. They argue that the showrunners sacrificed the lived reality of a domestic abuse victim simply because they wanted the audience to throw their popcorn at the screen and tweet about twist.
Yeah.
They took a girl's profound trauma and weaponized it into cheap cliffhanger bait. It betrays the character, betrays the audience, and it betrays any survivor watching who might see their own terror reframed as malicious villainy.
It is profound failure of empathy on the part of the creators. But even the mishandling of Chloe's testimony pales in comparison to the show's treatment of Tyler Down.
This is deeply uncomfortable to talk about, but it is the absolute epicenter of the video essays. Tyler is the quintessential school outcast. Throughout the first and second seasons, he has been bullied relentlessly, physically assaulted, and completely ostracized. And in the background, we see him slowly stockpiling firearms. The show is very clearly telegraphing that he is on the path humming a school shooter.
School violence is an American epidemic, and tackling it requires immense delicacy. But the essay argues that the writers simply didn't know how to organically push Tyler over the edge into carrying out an attack.
They needed a catalyst.
So in the final episode, to provide that catalyst, they orchestrate a scene of unfathomable brutality. In a school bathroom, Tyler is ambushed by Monty and two other athletes. He is beaten, held down, and brutally, graphically sexually assaulted with a mop handle.
It's just horrific.
The video essay notes that the scene is completely unsparing in its depiction, lingering on the violence and showing heavy bleeding.
Mert KK's reaction to this scene is pure, unfiltered disgust. The essay calls it needlessly cruel, a destructively abusive piece of television that was tacked onto the script merely to justify a school shooter plotline the writers didn't know how to.
Right.
They utilized the graphic, horrific rape of a male student purely as a mechanical plot device to push a character toward mass violence.
It is the absolute pinnacle of prioritizing shock value over narrative substance. And the immediate aftermath of this assault, the climax of the season, is just as ethically egregious. Driven to a psychotic break by the assault, Tyler arrives at the school's spring fling dance, armed with an arsenal of assault rifles, prepared to massacre his classmates.
The tension is at its absolute max. A heavily armed, severely traumatized student is in the parking lot. And what happens? The protagonist, Clay Jensen, hears about it, walks outside, and stands completely unprotected in front of Tyler. He stares down the barrel of an assault rifle, and using nothing but earnest dialogue and the power of friendship, he talks Tyler down in under 3
minutes.
Tyler cries, hands the assault rifle over to Clay, gets into a friend's car, and they speed away into the night before the police sirens even arrive.
If we connect this sequence to the bigger picture, the societal implications are genuinely horrifying. Remember the paradox we established at the beginning. This is a show that explicitly claims to be an educational tool, shedding light on difficult topics to keep young people safe.
Right.
And the climax of their narrative effectively broadcasts the message that the appropriate solution to an active, heavily armed school shooter is for an untrained, unarmed teenager to walk outside into the line of fire and act as a makeshift hostage negotiator.
It is astronomically dangerous message. It romanticizes a scenario that in the real world results results in mass casualties. Mert KK argues that the writers slapped an attempted mass shooting onto the end of the season just so they could add another severe black screen content warning to the beginning of.
Yeah, it becomes a marketing.
The content warning itself became a badge of honor for the marketing, prove how edgy and important the show. The shock value completely nullified any legitimate claim of shedding light or starting a helpful conversation.
The show began to treat real-world epidemics not as issues to be explored, but as raw fuel for the content. And all of these disparate elements we've discussed, the forced plot lines for characters who had nowhere to go, the massive logical retcons to the timeline, the exploitation of graphic trauma for water cooler shock value, they don't just happen in a vacuum. They accumulate.
They pile up.
And according to the video essay's conclusion, the cumulative weight of these terrible decisions ultimately results in the total destruction of the show's two core foundational characters:
the narrative assassination of Hannah Baker and the incelification of Clay Jensen.
Let's examine what happens to Clayfer. In Season 1, Clay was the audience surrogate. He was the well-intentioned, grieving friend. He had a pure, albeit slightly romanticized, connection with Hannah, and his primary motivation was finding justice for her and understanding his own complicity.
But because of the retcon contagion we talked about earlier, the entire reality of his relationship with Hannah changed, because the writers decided that Hannah was actually having a secret, passionate summer romance with Zach Dempsey, and because she was secretly writing explicit poetry and exchanging hundreds of texts with other people, Clay's position in her life is retroactively demoted.
Yeah, he's pushed to the margins of her story.
He wasn't her primary confidant. He wasn't the sole bright spot in her tragic life. He was just a nerdy guy she worked with at the movie theater who she thought was sweet.
And the essay brilliantly analyzes how Clay reacts to this shifting reality. When Clay discovers that Hannah, an autonomous teenage girl, had consensual sexual agency with other people, particularly athletes he despises, he does not process it with maturity. The essay points out that he actively devolves.
He throws violent tantrums.
He does. He hallucinates a version of her just so he can scream at her. He becomes incredibly possessive of a girl who is already dead.
Mert KK uses a very specific, loaded. Clay transforms into an angry, possessive creep who views Hannah not as a complex, flawed human being, but as a manic pixie dream girl who existed solely to validate his own feelings.
Right.
He claims to the world that he is fighting for her memory, but his actions prove he is really just fighting to preserve his own sanitized, idealized version of her. He hijacks her profound tragedy and makes it entirely about his own hurt pride.
He becomes deeply unlikable, but the ultimate victim of the Season 2 writing room is Hannah Baker herself.
They completely systematically butcher her.
In Season 1, the conceit of the show relies on us trusting Hannah. Her 13 cassette tapes are presented as her subjective truth. We know she is a teenager, we know her perspective might miss some adult nuances, but we fundamentally trust the emotional reality of her pain.
We buy into it.
But in Season 2, as the writers bend over backwards to generate new plot lines by fleshing out the secret lives of the supporting cast, they inadvertently destroy their protagonist. The only mechanical way to give the supporting cast new secrets was to prove that Hannah was lying by omission on her tapes constantly.
Suddenly, the lonely girl wasn't lonely. She had a massive support system of friends she just capriciously chose to ignore. Suddenly, the narrative that she couldn't talk to her parents is undermined by flashbacks showing her mom being unnecessarily cruel to her, shifting the blame. Suddenly, she is shown willingly hanging out with her future rapist, giving him mixed signals.
The writers, blinded by their desperate need to fuel the episodic drama, accidentally turned their tragic protagonist into a highly unreliable narrator. To prop up the second season, they structurally framed Hannah Baker as a liar.
And this is where Mert KK's autopsy hits its emotional climax, and it is a sobering moment for anyone who creates media. The video essay details the direct, real-world impact of this specific writing. Mert KK notes that after they posted their review of the first season of the show, their YouTube comments section was absolutely flooded with vitriolic, misogynistic rants from viewers.
Yeah, the reaction was intense.
Hundreds of comments claiming that women lie for attention, that Hannah was just a hysterical girl who made it all up to ruin men's lives, and that teenage girls exaggerate everything for drama.
And what does the writing of Season 2 do? It validates every single one of those bad faith arguments. By rewriting Hannah as a girl who lied, exaggerated, and hid massive positive parts of her life, specifically to construct a false victim narrative on tape, the show hands ammunition directly to the misogynist.
The irony is suffocating. This show was originally created, pitched, and marketed to dismantle toxic victim-blaming culture. They wanted to show the devastating consequences of bullying and assault, and in their corporate greed to squeeze a second season out of a narrative that was already definitively closed, they accidentally validated the exact culture they were fighting against.
They did.
They sacrificed the integrity of their own protagonist just to keep the cameras rolling.
Consider for a moment how media framing dictates real-world empathy. When a scriptwriter in a boardroom decides to make a teenage victim a retroactive lie liar just to land a cool plot twist for episode 6. They aren't just making a bad piece of art. They are shaping the cultural vocabulary of how audiences view real victims in the real world.
That's the real...
They are giving bad faith actors the exact narrative proof they need to look at a real-life survivor and say, well, maybe she's just making it up for attention, just like that girl on TV.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at a television show that introduced itself to the world as a noble public service announcement. We looked closely and found a few fleeting, powerful moments of stark realism. Mr. Porter's agonizing tears on the witness stand, Jessica's infuriating encounter with cold judicial reality, and Nina's complex desperation to control her own story.
Yeah, those moments were there.
But ultimately, we watched a meticulous autopsy of a show that cannibalized its own myth. It broke its own rule, exploited graphic trauma for empty shock value, and systematically assassinated its lead character's integrity, all to feed the endless hunger of the binge television content.
It serves as a permanent warning. It proves that stories dealing with severe human trauma require an ironclad ethical and the binge television model, which inherently demands endless escalation, manufactured cliffhangers, and shocking twists to keep viewers engaged, simply cannot sustain that required consistency over a long period.
Which brings us back to where we started. When you look at the blueprint of Season 2 of 13 Reasons Why, the foundation isn't just cracked. The entire house has been torn down and rebuilt into a funhouse mirror version of itself, distorting everything it originally.
As we close this incredibly heavy exploration, I want to leave you with a concept that builds on the foundation of Mert KK's. It's something to ponder as you navigate the media landscape moving forward.
I'd love to.
Consider the concept of narrative entropy. In physics, the law of entropy states that closed systems inevitably move toward chaos and disorder. In serialized storytelling, perhaps there is a natural, unavoidable limit to how long you can stretch a trauma narrative before the system collapses, before it inevitably degrades into exploitation, sensationalism, and chaos.
Wow.
It leads us to wonder, are some stories, especially those dealing with profound human pain and ultimate tragedy, simply meant to be finite? And does refusing to let a story end, simply because it is profitable, ultimately become an act of violence against the story itself?
That is a staggering thought, and one that is going to stay with me for a very long time. Have you ever watched a TV show crash and burn so spectacularly that you absolutely had to know how it went so wrong?
Oh, totally. Like a car crash you just can't look away from.
Exactly. Well, it is Monday, July 6th, 2026, and today, on the Deep Dive, we are exploring a massive narrative train wreck.
The kind of train wreck that takes seasons to build, right?
Oh, yeah. You know that specific feeling where a storytelling choice is so baffling, like so completely divorced from logic or tone, that you find yourself pausing the screen.
Staring at your living room wall.
Literally just staring at the wall, wondering how a room full of highly paid professional writers looked at a whiteboard and said, yes, this is it. This is the story we want to tell.
It's a very specific kind of morbid curiosity, isn't it? I mean, we are drawn to narrative failures almost more than we are to narrative triumphs.
We really are. Why do you think that is?
Because they reveal the internal mechanics of storytelling. When a story works perfectly, the machinery is invisible. You feel the emotion.
Right, you're just along for the ride.
Exactly. But when it fails, you see every stripped gear, every broken belt, every desperate patch job the writers tried to apply to a sinking ship.
And that broken machinery is exactly what we are unpacking today. We are taking a scalpel to the deeply controversial third season of the 13 Reasons Why.
It's quite the undertaking.
It is. And our roadmap for this autopsy is a massive, highly detailed analysis by a YouTube creator named Mert Cake. They meticulously dissect the architecture of the higher...
They really tear it down to the studs.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
But to be clear to you listening at home, our mission today isn't simply to recap a teen drama. I mean, that wouldn't be much dive.
No, not at all. Our mission is to explore how media attempts, and sometimes drastically, dangerously, fails to tackle heavy, real-world issues.
We're looking at the mechanics of how this show mishandled masks like redemption, trauma, activism, justice.
And before we get into the gears of this machine, we really need to set some ground rules for you, the listener. Because of the nature of the show we're analyzing, this deep dive touches on some incredibly heavy, politically and emotionally charged topics.
We're going to be discussing storylines that involve sexual assault, abortion, deportation, and, deep flaws within the justum.
Yeah, so we want to be exceptionally clear right up front. We are not taking side, nor are we endorsing the original creator's personal viewpoints on these real-world political issues.
Not at all.
Our goal is strictly to impart the fascinating analysis of the story structure. We are looking at how the writers chose to frame these issues and why those framing choices ultimately broke the foundational logic of the show's universe.
Okay, let's unpack. Because to understand where Season 3 goes entirely off the rails, we have to talk about how it begins.
The big pivot.
The massive, whiplash-inducing pivot. It shifts from a heavy drama about the devastating ripple effects of suicide and sexual assault into, and I'm not kidding, a literal whodunit murder mystery.
It's jarring.
It is. The central hook becomes, who killed the school's serial rapist, Bryce Walker? And to navigate this mystery, the writers make a mechanical choice that immediately destabilizes Hyde.
They introduce Ani.
Yes, they introduce a brand new character named Achola.
Ani is a fascinating, almost tragic case study in screenwriting misstep. Let's just look at who she is on paper for a second.
Okay.
She is an English girl whose mother works as a live-in nurse for Bryce Walker's incredibly wealthy family.
Right.
But functionally,
Yeah.
within the actual mechanics of the script, Ani isn't really a human being when she arrives. She's a plot device.
Just a walking tool for the writers.
Exactly. In screenwriting terms, she is an exposition dispenser and a human catalyst. Her job isn't to exist. Her job is to explain the plot to the audience and force the other characters to do things.
She just parachutes into this tightly knit friend group, 26 hours into the total runtime of the series?
Something like that, yeah.
And somehow, within 5 minutes, she is instantly at the center of everything. She's the omniscient narrator. She's conducting her own private, unsanctioned police investigation.
It's a lot to ask an audience to swallow.
It honestly reminds me of a corporate merger.
Oh, how so?
Imagine you have a tight-knit department that has been through absolute hell together. Maybe they just survived massive company layoffs. They have all this shared trauma and a very specific way of communicating.
Right, they've got history.
Exactly. And then corporate helicopters and a brand new middle manager from outside who doesn't know anybody's name, doesn't know the history, and suddenly she's demanding everyone's password and asking deeply personal questions at the water.
That's a brilliant way to put it.
Of course the existing employees are going to reject her. Why on earth would professional writers think the audience would react any differently?
That is the perfect analogy, because it highlights the disconnect between writer intent and audience reality. Why did the writers do this? If you look closely at their dilemma, you can see they backed themselves into a corner.
What were they trying to do?
They wanted to attempt the impossible. They wanted to humanize Bryce Walker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but they couldn't do that through the eyes of the existing characters. Every single character in that show had either been directly abused by Bryce or deeply traumatized by the fallout of his abuse.
Yeah, if they used Clay or Jessica to look at Bryce, all the audience would see is a monster.
Exactly. So they needed a blank slate. They needed a newcomer who could look at Bryce without prejudice, someone who could see the good in him because she was entirely ignorant of his past.
But in forcing Annie to serve that specific mechanical purpose, she becomes incredibly unright.
Almost sociopathic to the audience.
Sociopathic is a strong word, but when you look at her actions, it fits. I mean, let's talk about the courtyard scene, because this completely blew my mind in the video.
The courtyard scene is rough.
It's episode 2. Annie has only been at the school for 8 months. She barely knows people. But through her snooping, she finds out that Chloe, a survivor of Bryce's abuse, is pregnant.
And Chloe is literally transferred to a different school just to escape the stigma, the gossip, and the trauma of the trial.
She is trying to start over, so what does Ani do? She tracks Chloe down at her new school. She walks up to her in the courtyard, a complete stranger might.
Right.
And when Chloe gets uncomfortable and tries to walk away, Ani screams across the crowded courtyard in full view of all of Chloe's brand new class. Did you ever tell Bryce that you were pregnant?
It's wild. Structurally, that scene demonstrates how Ani's role as a plot driver completely overrides any basic human empathy the character should possess.
Yeah, she has zero tact.
If Ani were written as a real teenager, she would understand the gravity of outing a rape survivor's pregnancy in a public space. But because the script needs Ani to gather clues for the murder, she weaponizes a survivor's deepest trauma just to get an answer.
And here is the real failure of the writing. The narrative never challenges her on this. She gets the information she wants. The show validates her cruelty because it moves the plot from point A to point B. It's just staggering. And it's not just the big traumatic moments where she feels artificial. It's her bizarre day-to-day.
Oh, her tone. She has this smarmy, condescending tone.
Yeah, she constantly interrupts people to correct them. It's kind of like a dramatic version of Sheldon Cooper just stepping in to deliver the final word and sucking all the oxygen out of them.
But the weirdest power dynamic they try to force is between her and Bryce. She plays poker with him. Now, keep in mind, Bryce is the son of her mother's employee. He is a guy born into massive, untouchable wealth and privilege. She lives in his guest house.
Yep.
And yet she sits at the poker table and absolutely dominates him, casually claiming beginner's luck.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that poker game, because it's a very heavy-handed. The writers are acutely aware of the massive power imbalance between a wealthy predator and the daughter of the household staff.
So they try to balance the scales. Exactly. To make their eventual romantic and emotional entanglement feel even remotely palatable to the audience, the show tries to flip that inherent privilege on its head.
by having her win at cards.
Right. It's suggesting that Annie, through sheer intellect and raw intuition, outmatches Bryce. It's a cheap, unearned way of neutralizing the threat he poses.
Like, oh, she can hold her own, so it's fine.
Exactly. It's the show's way of putting them on an even playing field. But as the analysis points out, it just comes off as a hollow excuse to ignore the terrifying reality of their dynamic. A serial rapist doesn't suddenly respect boundaries just because you beat him at Texas Hold'em.
Right. God, that is so true. And speaking of hollow excuses for character bonding, I have to bring up the alien killer robots subplot.
Yes, the AKR incident.
So, the writers need Annie to bond with Clay, who is the longtime, intensely brooding protagonist show. They need them to be partners.
Right, they need to manufacture a connection.
So, they have them magically discover they share a mutual obsession with this obscure sci-fi comic book. This leads to a scene that feels like it was ripped straight out of a weird harem anime.
It really does.
Ani suggests they design cosplay. She essentially commands Clay to take off his clothes so she can measure him with a tape measure.
Just completely out of nowhere.
Then she strips down her underwear and does this proud little flourish to get measured, leaving Clay completely flustered and stammering. And then the subplot vanishes.
Wait, really? It just goes away?
Completely vanishes. We never see the cosplays. It never comes up again. It exists purely to manufacture a jarring, completely unearned physical intimacy.
It's the illusion of a relationship built entirely on tropes rather than chemistry. Think of it as the Postman effect.
The Postman effect. Explain that.
So, the audience implicitly understands that Annie is just the postman delivering the mail. She's just a character executing the writer's plot points. She has no internal life of her own.
Okay, I follow you.
But because we, the audience, have spent 2 grueling seasons with this specific group of traumatized kids, we become fiercely protective of them, like a territorial Yorkshire Terrier yapping at the letterbox.
That makes total sense.
When Annie tries to force her way in, we reject. The writers assume that if a character simply acts like they belong, the audience will eventually acquiesce. But trauma bonding doesn't work like that, in real life or in fiction.
Which makes her partnership with Clay even more infuriating. The two of them function as this bizarre, two-headed sphinx of terrible detective work.
They really do. The pacing of this mystery is agonizing because it follows the exact same formula every single episode.
Let me guess. A side character acts suspicious.
Exactly. A side character does something mildly suspicious. Bonnie turns to Clay and says, "Do you think they killed Bryce?" Clay says, "No, I've known them since kindergarten. They wouldn't do that."
And Ani just won't let it go.
Right. She narrows her eyes and whispers. Then they spend the next 50 minutes of runtime harassing that classmate, prying into their deepest, darkest secrets.
Secrets that have absolutely nothing to do with the murder, I might add, just to pat out.
They do this to almost every single person in their orbit, and they never once pause to think, hey, maybe we shouldn't baselessly accuse our deeply traumatized friends of a felon.
But Annie isn't just being nosy to waste time. Her entire existence, her forced integration into the group, her proximity to Bryce, it was all meticulously engineered to be the bridge to the show's most controversial, heavily criticized.
The redemptions.
Yes. She is the vehicle through which the writers attempt to execute the redemption of...
Right.
Now, let me stop you right there and play devil's advocate. Because when I look at the landscape of modern television, isn't the whole point of prestige TV to prove that nobody is 100% evil?
Sure, that's a huge trope.
Look at Don Draper in Mad Men, or Walter White in Breaking Bad, or Tony Soprano. We spend seasons watching these men do horrific, unforgivable things, and yet the writing constantly forces us to find the shred of humanity inside them.
Yep.
So weren't the writers of 13 Reasons Why just trying to elevate their teen drama to that prestige level? Weren't they just trying to give Bryce Walker that Tony Soprano level of...
It's a very fair question, and it gets to the heart of why this specific attempt failed so catastrophically compared to those prestige shows. The difference comes down to one word: agency.
Agency.
Yeah, Walter White and Tony Soprano are fascinating because they are acutely aware of the evil they commit. They have agency. They make deliberate, calculated choices to destroy lives for their own gain.
And the shows interrogate the psychology behind this.
Exactly. 13 Reasons Why, however, strips Bryce of his agency to make him sympathetic. They don't want to explore the dark depths of his entitlement. They want to excuse it.
Ah, that makes so much sense. It's the difference between a villain choosing the dark path and a show pretending the villain tripped and fell onto the dark path by accident.
Perfectly said. The analysis we're looking at draws a brilliant contrast here, looking at how the show handles the redemptory, toxic male character.
Right. Bryce, Tyler.
Yes. Bryce, the serial rapist. Tyler, the outcast who brought an assault rifle to a school dance. And Justin, the drug addict who is complicit in allowing his girlfriend to be assaulted.
And the crazy thing is, the writing clearly demonstrates that it actually knows how to execute a proper redemption arc?
Right, because it does so beautifully with Justin and Tyler.
Let's look at Justin's arc first, because this is universally praised in the autopsy as a massive success. Justin is battling a severe, life-threatening addiction to heroin and later oxycodone.
And in a sickening twist of irony, the oxycodone is initially supplied to him by Bryce.
Exactly. Justin's redemption isn't a magical overnight fix, it is brutal.
It works because it is grounded in the grueling reality of consequence and accountability. I mean, Justin ends up living on the streets.
He has to navigate the constant threat of his violent stepfather. He is fighting a war inside his own body.
He doesn't just wake up one morning and declare himself a good person. The pivotal moment for Justin revolves around his football coach.
Oh, this scene was so good.
Right. The coach pulls him aside and delivers some incredibly harsh but necessary tough love. He tells Justin that being part of a team, being part of a community, means you stop making excuses for your behavior and you start owning your mistakes.
And that conversation actually lands. It changes his behavior. Justin makes the agonizing decision to go to the team captain, Zach, and confess that he is going to fail an upcoming mandatory drug test.
And he doesn't ask Zach to fix it. He just owns the failure.
And Zach, who is so moved by Justin's raw honesty and his willingness to take the hit, actually switches their urine samples to cover for it. It's this quiet, profound moment of brotherhood that is earned entirely through painful, unvarnished honesty.
Then we look at Tyler. Tyler's arc is equally effective, but for a completely different mechanical reason.
Why does Tyler's work?
Tyler's redemption works because the narrative forces him to sit in the absolute depths of his suffering before he is allowed to heal. After suffering a horrific, graphic sexual assault in the bathroom at the end of season 2, Tyler is shattered.
He is broken down to his atomic component.
Yeah, the physical portrayal of his trauma is so hard to watch, but it's vital.
He takes photos of his fading bruises in his bedroom, almost as a way to prove to himself that it actually happened.
And the show treats him as such a fragile, volatile risk that the core friend group literally creates a rotating schedule to babysit him 24 hours a day.
They are terrified he will hurt himself or someone else.
His rehabilitation is a slow, agonizing marathon of learning how to simply exist in a room with other people again. He has to relearn trust from scratch.
And this arc culminates in Tyler finally, carefully confessing the truth of his assault to Clay and later to Jessica.
The analysis points out that these confession scenes are a triumph of acting and writing. They earn real, visceral tears from the audience because the vulnerability feels entirely earned. Tyler did the work.
But then we have Bryce Walker, a character who, by his own smug admission in previous seasons, has ruined the lives of at least 10 women. The analysis refers to his redemption arc as veteran mode, but honestly, it feels more like the writers typed in a cheat code to bypass the work.
There is no grueling marathon for Bryce.
None. The show just suddenly tries to engineer pity by throwing a tragic backstory at the wall to see what sticks.
It is entirely unearned. Suddenly, in season 3, we're supposed to care that Bryce's father was emotionally distant and eventually abandoned the family.
We are given these soft focus, Hallmark movie flashbacks, like the paint scene.
Right. There's a scene where his mother, Nora, is painting a room green because as a child she was strictly forbidden from having a green.
Young Bryce accidentally knocks over the paint can, spilling it everywhere.
And instead of getting angry, they just collapse into a fit of warm, bonding laughter.
It's so manipulative, it reminds me of a PR firm trying to do damage control for a massive corporate disaster.
How so?
Okay, imagine a chemical company dumps thousands of gallons of toxic sludge into a town's water supply, poisoning the community. And instead of paying for the cleanup or facing a tribunal, the company's PR team just puts out a commercial with acoustic guitar music showing the CEO planting a single tree and crying.
Wow.
They try to rebrand the toxic spill as a sparkling water. That is exactly what the writers write. They are slapping a coat of green paint on a condemned, structurally toxic building and calling it a sanctuary.
That PR analogy is spot on because the show actively attempts to rebrand his present behavior as well. Bryce suddenly becomes inexplicably docile and saintly.
He starts attending his mother's new yoga.
Right, and the writers give us a scene where Bryce is in the downward dog pose and he literally bursts tears. The visual language of the scene is unmistakable. It is framing him as bowing down, begging the universe for
And we can't forget how this ties back to Annie. The show forces Bryce into this soft, deeply respectful, almost virginal sexual with her.
He acts like a grateful, wounded fawn.
He politely takes her orders, he never once oversteps a bound, and he treats her with this awestruck. It is completely fundamentally antithetic, violent, entitled, predatory sociopath we watch entire.
He even transfers to a new school, Hillcrest, where his new football teammates subjected him to a brutal physical beating.
And Bryce he doesn't fight back, curls up and takes the punishment like a martyr.
This is where the narrative philosophy of the show becomes deeply structurally troubled. Let's look at the mechanics of how the writers excuse him.
Okay.
Bryce tells accounts that he feels like he loses himself to a Mr. Hyde persona. The show begins to treat his predatory violence not as a series of calculated choices born of immense wealth and male entitlement, but as a biological impulse.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they frame it like a genetic predisposition to alcohol inherited from a grandfather who was abusive.
By doing that, they're essentially saying he couldn't help it. His genes made him a monster, which removes his agency entirely.
Precisely. And by removing his agency, the show gives the audience implicit permission to forgive him. If he's just sick, if it's just a disease he inherited, then we shouldn't judge him so harshly.
Right. It's terrifying.
But doing this completely obliterates the core message of the entire first season. The premise of 13 Reasons Why was supposed to be about radical accountability. It was about showing that every action, every deliberate choice to harm someone has a devastating ripple effect.
Right.
By suddenly deciding that the primary antagonist isn't actually responsible for his choices, the structural foundation of the show collapsed.
And here's the truly devastating side effect of that collapse. When a writer decides to spend all of their narrative currency on elevating and excusing the abuser, someone else has to pay the price.
It's a zero-sum game.
It really is. In this case, to make Bryce look like a calm, evolving saint, the show has to actively derail and villainize the actual victims who are just trying to survive the trauma he inflicted on them.
It is the central, unavoidable tragedy of Season 3's thematic structure. Push Bryce up, they have to push his victims down.
The analysis we are working from perfectly illustrates this narrative bias by contrasting the storylines of two of Bryce's prominent victims, Chloe and Jessica.
Let's start with Chloe.
Yes, because despite the chaos of this season, the autopsy actually heaps massive praise on how the writers handled her specific journey, particularly her decision to seek an abortion.
The analysis calls it one of the most grounded, honest, judgment-free depictions of the topic on television, entirely bypassing the chief shock value that usually accompanies teen pregnancy storylines.
It is a remarkable oasis of good writing in a desert of bad.
It really is. Chloe's storyline is deeply rooted in emotional reality. When she discovers she is pregnant with Bryce's child, her first attempt to get help leads her to a clinic called Resources for Choice.
But it's a bait and switch.
Exactly. It turns out to be a deceptive, anti-choice religious center that uses emotional manipulation to guilt vulnerable teenagers into keeping their pregnancies.
But Chloe, showing incredible agency and clarity, realizes it's a trap. She leaves, and she eventually gets real medical help with the quiet, steadfast Zach.
And the show makes a very bold, deliberate choice to actually show the clinical procedure. They don't cut to black. They sit with her in that room.
And during the procedure, Chloe is clutching this tiny plastic fetus that one of the aggressive protesters shoved into her hands outside the clinic.
Wow.
It is such a profound, heavy visual metaphor for her inner conflict. You see her wrestling with the very real desire to one day be a mother, crashing against the horrific reality that she absolutely cannot carry her rapist's child.
That's incredibly powerful.
She faces the emotional aftermath honestly, she grieves, and then she makes the active choice to quietly move forward with it.
It is treated with immense respect and dignity. The narrative allows Chloe to heal on her own terms. But then you contrast that with how the writers treat Jessica Davis.
Right. Night and day.
Jessica takes a fundamentally different path to healing. She refuses to be quiet. She channels her trauma into vocal, disruptive, political activism.
She organizes a survivors group called Hands Off. She protests sexist school events. She runs for student body president to enact systemic change.
She even chooses to start dating Justin again, specifically as a way to reclaim her bodily autonomy and re-engage with her own sexuality on her own terms.
And how does the narrative reward this incredible display of resilience with sheer, unadulterated contempt?
It really does.
The show treats Jessica like she is a nuisance. It frames her valid, righteous anger as a dangerous, slippery slope to domestic terror.
The contrast is truly jarring. If you look at the mechanics of the script, whenever Jessica tries to enact positive, systemic change, the narrative immediately introduces a roadblock to undermine her credibility.
For example?
Well, when she suggests reallocating funding from the football team, which has been a breeding ground for toxic, predatory behavior toward the arts program, the script frames her as an unreasonable, power-hungry dictator.
To make matters worse, they introduce a character named Casey to be the devil on Jessica's shoulder.
Oh, Casey.
Casey is a walking, talking caricature of a militant feminist. The writers literally put her in a t-shirt that just says female in bold letters, and her only personality trait is yelling "fuck Bryce" at inappropriate.
She exists solely to push Jessica toward extremism, making the entire concept of feminist activism look unhinged.
The underlying message the show is broadcasting is deeply insidious. It's like protesting is fine in theory, maybe hold a candle or a sign, but the second you actually disrupt the status quo or make people in power uncomfortable, you are the bad guy.
This brings us to a massive failure regarding the golden rule of storytelling. Show, don't tell.
Right.
The script relies on Ani's omnipresent narration and warnings from authority figures like Principal Bolin to tell the audience that Jessica is out of control, that her anger is toxic, that she's going too far.
But look at what the camera actually shows her doing.
Exactly.
She hands out flyers in the hallway. She tries to adjust a school budget. She organizes a peaceful interruption of a sexist powder puff sporting event. She's basically running a model UN campaign. She isn't burning down the gym.
The narrative is terrified of actually letting a female victim hold real, uncompromised power. It reveals a deep, subconscious bias in the writers. In their desperate, mechanical need to make Bryce sympathetic, they accidentally demonize the very concept of holding abusers accountable. In this show's universe, Jessica isn't allowed to just be right. Her anger has to be corrected by the narrative.
And that leads us to the ultimate insult. The moment in the analysis where the creator practically threw their hands up in absolute disgust.
Oh, the speech.
It happens during Jessica's big triumphant moment. She wins student body president. She holds an assembly to empower her fellow survivors. She stands at the podium and delivers this beautifully written, profoundly moving speech about trauma, comparing it to putting the pieces of a broken mirror back together.
It's a gorgeous sentence.
But where did the writers decide she got those beautiful words? She plagiarized. She stole them from an apology tape that was recorded by Bryce Walker.
It is a staggering, almost incomprehensible narrative choice.
I just cannot fathom the logic. It's like having a corporate whistleblower stand up in front of a congressional hearing to expose years of toxic, deadly workplace. And for their grand, inspiring manifesto, they just read a PR memo written by the corrupt CEO who caused the disaster.
It's insulting to the character.
Why? Why would a show that publicly claims to be a megaphone for victims spend so much screen time making the victims look unreasonable, hysterical, and devoid of their own wisdom, while the serial abuser is portrayed as this calm, evolved philosopher who holds the key to their...
It speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding of the material they are writing. And unfortunately, this unequal treatment, this heavy-handed bias where the privileged are protected and the vulnerable are punished doesn't stop at gender or trauma.
Where else?
It extends glaringly into how the show handles race, class, and the justice system. The deep dive draws a huge neon line between how the narrative treats Clay Jensen, the wealthy white protagonist, versus how it treats Tony Padilla, a marginalized kid from a working-class immigrant family.
Okay, let's talk about Clay's impenetrable plot armor. Clay is a middle-class white teenager living in a nice suburb. Throughout the entire season, he acts with absolute staggering...
He really does whatever he wants.
He actively inserts himself into an ongoing homicide, and he drives his car to the houses of prime suspects and just parks outside, glaring at them through the windshield like he's Batman.
Right.
When the police bring him in for questions, he literally screams in the sheriff's face. He refuses legal counsel. When his parents try to hire a lawyer to protect him from a murder charge, he yells at them and storms.
And what are the consequences for Clay's incredibly reckless behavior? Absolutely nothing. The universe bends over backward to protect him.
Clay operates under the illusion of danger. He behaves like a kid playing Rick Grimes in the zombie apocalypse. He desperately wants the aesthetic of trauma. He wants the drama of being the center stage vigilante, but he never once has to face the actual systemic danger of his actions.
The police treat his outbursts with patience. His parents coddle. He is insulated by his privilege. Meanwhile, you look at Tony Padilla, and Tony is actually living the nightmare that Clay is pretending to be in.
Tony's reality is crushing. Tony comes from a marginalized background. His parents are undocumented Mexican immigrants.
And unlike Clay, Tony knows exactly how high the stakes are. He follows every single rule of survival. When the cops talk to him, he is polite, he's deferential, he keeps his head down, he calmly requests a lawyer. He does everything right.
But what happens? Bryce's father, Barry Walker, a man of immense wealth and power, decides he doesn't like Tony. So out of sheer vindictive spite, Barry calls ICE and reports Tony's parents.
We need to pause and establish the context here, because for our global listeners, ICE refers to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Right.
Calling ICE on an undocumented family isn't just a minor legal hurdle. It is the deployment of state-sanctioned force to tear a family apart. Permanent. Barry Walker essentially uses the United States government as a personal weapon to destroy a marginalized teenager's life, simply because he can.
And Tony's life is entirely decimated. He is forced to drop out of school. With his parents gone, he has to liquidate his entire life to pay for legal fees to try and... He sells everything, including his beloved vintage Mustang.
And the tragic irony is, he has to sell the Mustang to Bryce Walker for $50,000.
Oh.
That specific financial transaction is what ends up implicating Tony in the murder investigation, dragging him into the police crosshairs. And Tony ends up homeless, sleeping on a cold concrete floor at his mechanic shop.
The contrast horrifying. Clay screams at a cop and goes home to a warm dinner. Tony asks for a lawyer and loses his family, his home.
But the real failure isn't just that this tragedy happens, it's how the writers choose to resolve it.
How does the narrative conclude this massive systemic destruction of a marginalized family with a hollow, overly crisp Zoom call on the Tony is looking at a laptop and his deported parents are smiling in Mexico, looking perfectly fine, telling him everything is going to...
It's insulting. It takes one of the most devastating, complex socio-political issues in the country and wraps it up with a neat, unearned bow, just so the audience doesn't feel too sad.
It's a complete lack of accountability for the privileged characters and total unmitigated devastation for the marginalized.
And we see this exact same failure of accountability play out in another incredibly bizarre subplot. The writers attempt to tackle the concept of toxic masculinity, which is a very real, very pervasive issue in high school environment. But instead of exploring the cultural and behavioral roots of male aggression, they use a physical substance as a clumsy metaphor.
Oh, steroids.
They use steroids.
This subplot felt like it was written in 1985 for an Let's look at Alex Stan.
Okay.
Alex is struggling with severe feelings of physical inadequacy after Jessica. In his mind, he thinks she left him because he is skinny and disabled from his suicide attempt. So to bulk up and reclaim his masculinity, he starts secretly taking anabolic steroids.
But the show doesn't just portray the side effects as normal mood swings or acne. They treat these steroids like demonic possession, or how old PSAs used to treat heroin. The drugs completely override his moral compass.
The script uses the steroids as a magical toggle switch for it turns Alex into a completely unhinged, violent aggressor.
There's a deeply disturbing scene where Alex, under the influence, visits a sex worker named Melody Scott. He becomes incredibly aggressive, violently jackhammering her against her will, screaming horrific, misogynistic slurs at her, and treating her like garbage.
And later he ends up doing cocaine in a car with Bryce. The transformation is absolute.
It really is.
I have to ask you, as someone looking at the mechanics of storytelling, is the show's reliance on steroids here just a massive cop-out? Is it just lazy writing to use a drug as a stand-in for bad behavior so they don't have to deal with the fact that maybe Alex is just kind of a terrible person?
It absolutely functions as a narrative cop-out. By blaming Alex's sudden, violent misogyny and sexual aggression entirely on a chemical substance in the exact same way, they subtly blame Bryce's predations on his genetics and his father's neglect with it. The show continuously strips its male characters of true culpability.
It's just shifting the blame.
It is a terrifyingly easy out. Instead of doing the hard work of exploring the deeply ingrained societal conditioning that leads to entitlement and male violence, the writers just point to a needle and say, the drugs made him do it. It trivializes the very real-world complexities of the issues they claim to be shedding light on.
It's just excuse after excuse for the boys and punishment after punishment for everyone. And all of these threads, the unearned redemptions, the villainized victims, the impenetrable plot armor, the absolute zero accountability, they all violently collide at climax.
The big reveal.
The deep dive finally uncovers the answer to the central mystery we've been dragging ourselves toward. Who killed Bryce Walker? And honestly, the reveal of the killer isn't even the shocking part. What is shocking, what is truly ethically bankrupt, is how the supposed heroes of the story deal with the...
Let's set the stage for the climax, because it requires walking through a chain reaction of escalating brutal violence that takes place on the night of the school's homecoming game.
Okay.
The chaos begins on the football field during a massive brawl between the rival teams. In the middle of the melee, Bryce deliberately targets Zach and completely shatters his leg, effectively ending Zach's athletic future and his chance at a scholarship.
It's a career-ending malicious assault. So later that night, Zach is burning with rage. He tracks Bryce down to the local Navy pier, and Zach exacts brutal retaliation.
He beats Bryce so mercilessly, so completely, that he breaks Bryce's arm and shatters his leg.
He leaves Bryce bleeding, immobilized, and crying in agony on the concrete pier in the freezing cold. Zach walks away, leaving him there.
And this is where the fatal encounter occurs. Shortly after Zach leaves, Alex, Standel, and Jessica arrive at the pier.
They find Bryce broken and bleeding on the ground.
Initially, Bryce begs them for help to get to a hospital. But then, as he is shivering in pain, his inherent entitlement flares up. He suddenly lashes out verbally. He starts screaming at them, threatening to ruin Zach's life, hurling abuse at Jessica.
And Alex, who is still ostensibly struggling with steroid aggression, simply reaches his breaking point.
He looks at Bryce, he grabs him, and he shoves the immobilized boy off the edge of the pier and into the freezing, turbulent river below.
Bryce has a broken arm and a broken leg. Can't swim. He can't even tread water. Alex and Jessica just stand at the edge of the pier, looking down into the dark, and they watch Alex Sandal. Jessica is an accessory.
That is the physical truth of the murder. But the cover-up is where the show's internal morality completely fractures into a million pieces.
A cover-up.
The lead investigating officer on the case is Deputy Standal, who happens to be Alex's father. Now, the autopsy meticulously points out that Deputy Standal is not an idiot. He clearly knows his son is guilty.
The show gives us scenes proving he has the physical evidence.
Exactly. He finds tire tracks at the scene that perfectly match his wife's car, which he knows Alex was driving that night. He finds footprints on the pier showing a distinct, uneven drag mark, a drag mark that perfectly matches Alex's physical disability and his limp.
The dad knows. The physical evidence is undeniable. But instead of doing his job, instead of confronting his son or making an arrest, Deputy Standal...
He sits down with Ani, our exposition-dispensing newcomer, and he willingly accepts a wildly flimsy, entirely fabricated story she spins out of thin air.
Ani realizes they need a fall guy to protect Alex, so she weaves a lie. And who does she choose to pin the murder on? Monty.
And this is where we have to talk about the Monty problem, because the handling of this character is incredibly dark, and it touches on some of the most harmful tropes in television history.
Let's remind everyone who Monty...
In Season 2, Monty was the brutal, sadistic bully who sexually assaulted Tyler with a broom handle. He is a monster.
Yeah.
But in Season 3, the writers introduce a new layer to his character.
It is revealed that Monty's hyperaggression stems from the fact that he's deeply closeted and terrified of sexuality.
He hooks up with a boy named Winston at a party. It's this moment of secret vulnerability. But immediately after, Monty panics. His internalized homophobia kicks in, and he violently beats Winston to a pulp to keep him quiet.
It's a tragic cycle of abuse. But eventually, the truth of what Monty did to Tyler in 2 comes out. Tyler bravely goes to the police, and Monty is finally arrested. He is sent to prison.
While he's in jail, his violently homophobic father visits him. The father realizes Monty is gay, and in a moment of utter disgust, spits on his own son.
Using some bizarrely noticeable CGI spit, which the video calls out as just a weird production choice.
Yeah, that was off. But it is a deeply humiliating, isolating moment for the character. And then, the writers make their most cynical move of all. Monty is conveniently killed off-screen in his jail cell. The implication is clear. He is murdered, presumably targeted for being outed as gay in a hostile prison environment.
He is brutally murdered off. And this is the moment Ani strikes. When Deputy Standal informs Ani and Clay that Monty died in prison, Ani immediately realizes that a dead man can't defend.
She weaves her completely baseless narrative, telling the police that Monty killed Bryce before he was arrested.
And Standal, desperate to protect his own guilty son, accepts the lie. He closes the case. Bryce's murder is officially pinned on...
But the true moral failure of this show isn't just the police corruption. It's not just the failure of the justice system. The ultimate betrayal is the reaction of the main cast.
This is the part that just makes... Think about what this means. When this group of kids, the kids we have followed for 3 the kids who supposedly learned about the profound value of human life, when they hear that Monty was brutally murdered in his jail, they don't care.
No, they don't.
They don't express an ounce of empathy for a kid who was killed for his sexuality. They collectively look at each other and say, thank God.
It is a horrifying sociopathic pragmatism. They actively use his tragic, violent death to close the case and save their own skins.
They literally take the classic lazy blame the dead guy trope, combine it with the harmful bury your gays trope, weaponize a character's marginalized sexuality, and have our supposed heroes joyfully wash their hands in his blood.
It's a lot.
They pin a murder on a dead, closeted gay kid so that the privileged middle-class white kid who actually committed the murder can walk free and go to prom. I am just flabbergasted.
The creator of the deep dive video expresses pure, unadulterated horror at this execution, and rightly so. The video perfectly captures why this is so offensive.
Why is that?
It functions as a twisted, grotesque meta-redemption for Monty, but only for the benefit of the writers. Let's be clear. The audience isn't supposed to feel sorry for Monty because he was a good person. He wasn't. He was a violent, irredeemable abuser.
Right.
But the audience feels sickened because the writers use his closeted sexuality and his brutal murder as a convenient, disposable trash can to hide the protagonist's crimes.
It shatters the foundational morality of the show.
It does. The characters we are supposed to root for, the ones the narrative frames as the good guys, actively decide that burying the truth and framing a dead minority is better than facing the consequences of their own act.
They become the exact thing they spent 3 seasons fighting against. A corrupt system that protects the privileged and buries the vulnerable. It completely betrays the entire premise the series was built upon.
It is a stunning, absolute collapse of narrative integrity.
To summarize this incredible, frustrating journey we've been on today, we looked at a deeply researched autopsy that meticulously tore down It took a story that was originally about the devastating, unavoidable ripple effects of trauma and twisted it into a convoluted, cheaply written murder.
A mystery that forces unearned forgiveness upon abusers, actively punishes and mocks victims for daring to be angry, uses marginalized characters as disposable plot devices, and abandons all ethical logic just to protect its favorite characters from consequences.
And as we wrap up, we have to ask the most important question. Why does this matter? Why should you, the listener, care about a deep dive into the mechanical failures of a teen soap opera?
Because the media we consume does not exist in a vacuum. It actively shapes the cultural conversation around incredibly sensitive, real-world topics.
13 Reasons Why was a massive phenomenon. It was watched by millions of young, impressionable...
When a platform of that size fumbles issues like justice, sexual abuse, trauma recovery, and systemic accountability so spectacularly, it has a tangible impact on how society at large frames these conversations.
It subtly dictates what we consider to be acceptable behavior, who we deem worthy of redemption, and who we expect to suffer in silence.
It's about the stories we tell ourselves, about who we are and who matters.
Thank you so much for joining us on this massive, complex deep dive today. We want to leave you with one final provocative thing to ponder as you go about your week. If our fiction is indeed a mirror, reflecting our true societal values back, what does it say about us when our stories decide that the absolute easiest way to solve a problem is to simply bury the truth alongside the people who are no longer around to defend themselves? Think about that. Have you ever, invested years of your life into a story only to watch its final chapter just completely derail, so spectacularly that you question why you even tuned in?
Oh, yeah. It is a profoundly frustrating experience. I mean, you give a show your time, your emotional energy, your trust, and then they just pull the rug right out from under you.
Exactly. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are basically performing an autopsy on a piece of media. We're unpacking this really comprehensive critique, which is drawn from Mert Tekke's incredibly detailed video essay all about the fourth and final season of the Netflix 13 Why.
Yeah, and, usually when we talk about a diagnostic autopsy or a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, right? Like engineering.
Right.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is, broken.
It's very binary.
Exactly. It's comforting because we like things to be visible. We like things easily categorized.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of narrative analysis, specifically looking at a long-running television show's final season, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just, completely busted.
Totally busted.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky. We are exploring how a show that initially built its entire cultural identity on, starting a conversation about heavy, very real teenage burdens, ultimately just collapsed.
Well, under the weight of its own narrative contrivances.
Exactly. And for you listening, our mission today is to really ground this conversation by analyzing why these writing failures actually matter to you, the audience.
Right, because this isn't just about nitpicking plot holes or pointing out continuity errors.
Right. Nobody cares about a Starbucks cup in the background.
Exactly. It is about understanding the unwritten contract between a storyteller and a viewer, and what happens when that contract is just blatantly breached.
So we're going to examine the structural issue, the illusion of stake, the really bizarre utilization of real-world trauma for cheap shock value, and honestly, the absolute erasure of reality, all just for the sake of it.
It is genuinely fascinating to look at the mechanics of bad story.
Yeah.
I mean, to understand why this final season falls apart, we really first have to look at how it was built.
Especially compared to what came before it.
Right. So the essay we're referencing uses this really incredible visual of a Miro board to describe the plotting of season 3.
Oh, I love this analogy. Now, if you aren't familiar, a Miro board is basically a digital whiteboard software used by corporate teams and designers for brainstorming.
Yeah, it's like a massive infinite canvas. You can slap up digital sticky notes, draw arrows, group chaotic ideas together.
Right, it's the perfect metaphor. The mapping for season 3 was described as this chaotic, multi-board chess game.
But instead of a pristine chessboard, imagine a board made of Play-Doh, where the pieces are just constantly shifting.
Yeah. In the narrative of 3, the tyrant rapist king was abruptly swapped out for a sweet, misunderstood king piece, with the writers just hoping nobody would really notice the drastic retcon.
Right, there were full competing timelines, flashbacks, interconnecting arrows, tying completely disparate topics together in really unusual ways.
It was a smorgasbord of chaos.
It really was.
Yeah.
But crucially, It was an entertaining, interwoven mess that actually eventually coalesced into a payoff.
Yeah, even if that payoff was an unearned, somewhat sensationalist murder, it still functioned as a puzzle for the viewer. It rewarded you for paying attention.
Exactly. But then we get to season 4, and the architecture just completely changes. The multiple timelines, gone.
Completely gone. The flashback, entirely abandoned. I mean, the episode count even drops down to...
Right, even the opening credits are stripped back. There are no little pictures, no clues, no scribbles to decipher. It's just a black screen with a title card.
It becomes a straight line. The critique compares it to a 12-lane highway where all the characters are just driving alongside each other at the exact same speed toward the exact same destination.
And that fundamental structural shift creates a massive, insurmountable pacing.
Why is that?
Well, because the story is now just a straight chronological line.
Right.
Without the engine of flashbacks or shifting perspectives, the writers are forced to take 2-hour problems and just stretch them into these grueling 10-hour odysseys.
Okay, wait, I need to stop you there, because I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Isn't a straight line better sometimes? Like, sometimes shows get way too bogged down in flashbacks and non-linear telling. Doesn't stripping it back to a simple chronological narrative actually streamline the viewing experience? Why is this 12-lane highway structure inherently a failure for this show?
That's a really great question. I mean, in a vacuum, linear storytelling is perfectly fine, but you have to look at the genre and the established mechanics of this specific show.
Right, 13 Reasons Why.
Yeah. It was built literally from season 1 on the reveal of hidden information. It relied on seeing a scene in the present and then seeing a flashback that changes the context of the present.
Okay. So when you flatten that into a straight line,
You lose your natural engine for suspense. You no longer have the mystery of what happened in the past to cause this. You only have what happens next.
and I'm guessing what happens next wasn't that interesting.
Well, that's the problem. The overarching story of season 4 is basically just a group of friends trying to cover up a murder and dealing with the paranoia of being caught.
Which is just not dynamic enough to sustain 10 hours of linear television.
Exactly. It feels incredibly repetitive. They refuse to let situations end organically or develop into something new. So episodes just become crammed with repetitive scenes of characters anxiously asking each other, are we going to get caught?
Are the police onto us over and over? Which makes me think of this analogy. Season 4 is kind of like a game of mousetrap.
Oh, that's good.
Right, because from the outside it looks like this convoluted mechanism of bells, whistles, and crazy contraption. But when you strip away the plastic flare, the ball is literally just rolling down a single, rigid, simple path.
Yes, and without the flashbacks to add actual layers to the narrative, the writers are forced to rely on incredibly cheap framing devices to manufacture tension.
Because they can't change a viewer's perspective with new information passed anymore.
Exactly. So they rely on bait-and-switch character traits in the present instead. They intentionally frame a scene to make you, the viewer, assume a character is acting one way, only to pull an entirely unearned 180-degree twist.
Just to subvert your expectations.
Just subvert them for no narrative reason.
The essay points out some wild examples of this, like take Dean Foundry, right? The new, incredibly stern dean of discipline at the school.
Oh, right.
The show frames a scene to make you think he is going to be horribly offended by 2 men being crowned prom king and queen.
They really lean into it.
They do. The lighting, the music, his dialogue. He is set up as this looming homophobic antagonist about to just ruin a beautiful moment. But then, snap, at the end of the scene, he casually reveals he actually has a black husband named Joshua.
Right, and the tension just evaporates.
It's basically used as a punchline.
It is the classic mean guy is actually secretly progressive trope, but the way it's deployed here is super manipulative.
How so?
Well, it's designed to make the viewer feel bad for assuming the worst about the character, right? But it completely ignores the fact that the show itself intentionally framed him that way through its own cinematic language.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The writers created a false prejudice just so they could scold the audience for believing the setup.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop with the dean. Look at Sheriff Diaz.
Oh, man. Sure.
In previous seasons, this is a man who nearly put a teenage boy away in prison for a murder he wasn't even present for. Based entirely on a gut feeling. He was a relentless antagonist.
Right, he was terrifying.
But in season 4, with zero narrative bridge to explain the change, he morphs into this fiercely protective, Severus Snape-like figure.
Wait, Severus Snape.
Yeah, we learn at the very end that he was secretly pulling strings the entire time to keep the kids safe and cover up their crimes.
That is total narrative whiplash. And then there is Officer Wynn, which, might be the most glaring example of this structural mission.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in season 3, Tony's entire storyline revolved around being the victim of unfair profiling and disproportionate police violence.
Right. It was a very serious, grounded look at a systemic issue.
But now, in season 4, Tony is grabbed and slammed slammed against a locker by Officer Wynn after a minor vandalism.
So as a viewer, you immediately think, okay, the show is echoing the unfair profiling theme again. This is going to be a tense, dangerous situation for Tony.
But no. The officer points out that Tony has red paint underneath his fingernails, so it completely justifies the physical aggression and the suspicion.
Right. The show sets up a scenario of police overreach, only to immediately validate the police act.
And it goes even further than that. Later, Tony is following Tyler, who is suspicious, and Officer Wynn grabs Tony again. In the heat of the moment, Tony makes a fist, which is a clear show of physical aggression toward a
Which, based on the show's own established history of how police treat Tony, you would expect a severe, life-altering reaction.
Exact. Instead, Officer Wynn just decides he likes Tony's fire and invites him to join a pro-am boxing league.
It's so absurd.
And this same officer later saves Tony from being arrested at a riot, knowing a third strike would send Tony to prison, and even goes on to help him secure a full college scholarship.
It's the ultimate not all cops narrative wrap-up, and it's wedged into a show that previously spent hours critiquing the institution.
It's bizarre.
Characters are framed around how they seem, then spun backward to make the viewer question their own assumptions. So why should you, the listener, care about this specific writing tactic?
Yeah, why does this matter?
Because it highlights a deeply frustrating trend in modern television. It reveals a fundamental disdain for an engaged audience.
What do you mean by disdain? Like they hate the viewers?
Well, writers seem increasingly terrified of viewers guessing where a story is going.
Yeah.
It's like a hangover from the late-stage Game of Thrones era, you know?
Yeah.
Where subverting expectations became the golden calf of screenwriting.
Oh, right. Subvert expectations at all costs.
Exactly. So instead of rewarding a viewer who pays attention, tracks the character arcs, and puts the clues together, the show pulls these unearned 180-degree twists just to shock. It actively punishes for understanding the story.
Right, because if the structure is just a flat highway and you can't use flashbacks and you're terrified the audience is bored, you have to manufacture speed bumps.
Yes.
And they did this using the absolute cheapest method of raising stakes in television history, the relentless death fake-out.
Oh, the fake-outs. The entire season is anchored by a massive fake-out right from the opening minutes.
The funeral.
Yes, the season opens with a flash forward to a mystery funeral, but it is a completely cookie-cutter, sterilized funeral.
There's literally no photo of the on the casket.
None. The eulogies are filled with generic platitudes that actively avoid using names, pronouns, or referencing the cause of death.
It's just an empty mystery box. And the irony is glaring because the speech at this mystery funeral asks things like, how are we responsible and what burdens do we place on teenagers?
Right.
When the show has literally spent 3 seasons supposedly unpacking exactly those questions. I mean, in season 3, the funeral of Bryce Walker was established in the very first episode.
You knew exactly who was in the box.
Right, and the mystery was how he got there, which framed an interesting narrative thought experiment. Season 4 just uses the funeral as a manipulative guess.
They hint that each episode will feature a different character giving testimony to help you use the process of elimination, but they abandon that framing device almost immediately.
It's so frustrating, and because they abandon their own structural promise, they replace genuine suspense with just relentless, episodic death fake-out. We have to talk about the car crash.
Oh, the car crash is a perfect example of this.
So Clay and Zach are in a car. Clay starts having a panic attack, steps on the gas, and is driving Zach's car at like 80 miles per hour on a winding road.
And they violently flip the car around a tight turn. It is a massive cliffhanger at the end of an episode.
So as a viewer, you are left thinking, oh my God, who survived? What are the legal ramifications of this? How does this change the group dynamic?
Then you tune in for the start of the next episode, and we find out several weeks have already passed.
Wait, weeks?
Yes. Clay is entirely unharmed. Zach reports a broken leg, limps for about half of one episode, and then apparently just forgets to limp.
That is insane. The physics of an 80-mile-per-hour rollover crash are completely ignored, and the accident itself is never acknowledged again by anyone.
It's totally absurd, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, Tyler, Clay, and Tony are cornered by a literal illegal arms dealer who points a gun at them and fires.
And what happens?
Cut to the start of the next episode. Totally forgotten. No one was shot.
You're kidding.
Nope. Charlie seemingly gets knocked dead at a protest. Next scene. It's totally fine. Tony fights a massive white supremacist in a boxing ring who genuinely threatens to kill him.
And Tony just beats him easily with zero issues, right?
Exactly.
Oh.
Clay is walking through the school and actually gets shot by a school shooter, only to look down and realize it was just a hallucination.
Fake out after fake out after fake out.
This relentless cycle reveals a very specific psychology in the writer's room. It's the fear of real consequence.
Right. Because if you write a consequence into a story, you are actually forced to deal with it. It places limitations on what character.
Exactly. If Clay is severely injured in a car crash, the writers have to write hospital scene. They have to deal with insurance, police reports, and his physical limitations in the following episodes.
Yeah, if Tyler is arrested for associating with illegal firearms, he can't go to prom.
By simply pretending these consequences don't exist, the writers save themselves a lot of narrative heavy lifting. But the resulting views experience becomes incredibly hollow for you as the audience.
Which brings us to this bizarre tracking subplot.
Oh, the phones.
On Christmas Day, Clay and Justin get brand new phones from their parents, loaded with, quote, all the hot new apps.
Naturally.
Very quickly, the parents start showing up exactly where the kids are. Like, Clay's dad magically finds him at the exact location he ran to the pier where Bryce died.
Right, and Dean Foundry miraculously knows Clay arrived at school at exactly 9:47 a.m. Just as dad knows about a weekend party before it happens.
So the teenagers become completely paranoid. They believe their parents have formed this sophisticated, unified Trek-it.
They start having clandestine meetings in stairwell, whispering under the watchful eyes of CCTV cameras. The tension is ratcheted up to an 11.
But how is this massive invasion of privacy and trust actually resolved?
Well, Clay's parents simply realize that tracking him makes him upset, so they just stop and politely apologize.
That's it.
That's it.
The whole overarching paranoia plot just evaporates with a sorry son. The critique notes a specific phrase that perfectly encapsulates this writing style. And that phrase is, I guess it could happen.
Yeah, that sums it up perfectly.
The show constantly relies on extreme, sub 1% fringe possibilities and presents them to you as the median, everyday reality.
Right, like, sure, I guess parents could buy expensive phones, coordinate a tracking ring, and then just immediately drop the whole thing with a polite apology the second their kid gets mad.
I guess a car could flip at 80 miles per hour and no one gets a concussion.
But is it compelling drama? No. It feels like you're watching someone play with action figures, just smashing them together and then putting them back in the toy box good as new.
When a narrative constantly operates in the realm of I guess it could happen in a fringe case, it loses all grounding in reality. It crosses a line from suspension of disbelief into narrative guilt.
But, you know, it is one thing when a show uses a fake car crash to manipulate. It crosses a massive ethical line when they apply that same consequence-free shock value to a systemic trauma.
And that brings us to the show's handling of activists, specifically the infamous Thursday episode.
Right, if you want to talk about moving action figures around for shock value, this is the most egregious example.
We move from individual character fake-outs to a systemic fake-out that traumatizes an entire school.
In this episode, Principal Bolin initiates a code red lockdown with absolutely no warning to the teachers or the students.
The police enter the premises, they aggressively rattle door handles, and then they actually fire blank rounds in the hallway outside classrooms to simulate a real active shooter.
Which is an astonishing violation of real-world protocols.
Sure.
I mean, live shooter drills, when they happen, are highly regulated, almost always performed with advance warning, and they certainly do not employ unannounced simulated gunfire by law enforcement while students are locked in classrooms.
The students and teachers genuinely believe they are going to die. We literally watch teenagers being psychologically tortured on screen.
They are crying. They are leaving final voicemails for their parents, telling them they love them, saying goodbye.
We see Estella de la Cruz, the sister of the previous season's villain, Monty, hiding in a bathroom cubicle. She's reading Crime and Punishment, weeping, and leaving a voicemail.
And who is hiding in the cubicle with her?
Tyler.
Tyler, which requires us to really unpack Tyler's arc here, because it is deeply, fundamentally problematic.
Let's remember the history the show established for Tyler. He was an aspiring school shooter. He previously brought a duffel bag full of illegal assault weapons to a school dance with the intent to commit a massacre.
Right, and that bag of guns, which was dredged up from a river, was magically negotiated away off-screen by Deputy Scandal in a prior season.
No legal consequences.
None. And how is Tyler rehabilitated in Season 4?
By acting as an undercover plant in illegal gun deals for the...
It's wild. He performs exceptionally well in a stop-the-bleed drill at school, casually correcting medical instructors on the specific dynamics of bullet entry and exit wounds.
He even talks about firearms to a college admissions interviewer with what the critique describes as uncomfortable sexual arousal.
And yet, during this terrifying, unwarned shooter drill, where is the rehabilitated Tyler? He is crying in the bathroom because the trauma of being in the school bathrooms where he was previously assaulted upsets him.
Stella, the sister of his comfort. And shortly after this intense psychological torture of a simulated shooting, Tyler asks Stella to prom.
And she enthusiastically agrees to go with the boy who almost shot up her school.
I have to ask, because the producers and writers of this show have historically defended their most controversial scenes by saying, we are starting a conversation. What conversation's being started here? What is the educational value of showing a school administration psychologically torturing its student body in a drill that violates every real-world ethical protocol?
The critique argues forcefully that there is no conversation being started. It raises a massive question about the ethics of controversy marketing.
Controversy marketing.
Yeah. The show cynically uses the visceral, real-world terror of school shootings purely for shock value. It's not a valuable educational tool for young viewers. It is simply a manipulative excuse to have characters weep and call their parents to say a final goodbye without the writers actually having to kill anyone off.
It is exploitative of real generational trauma.
Absolutely. And the immediate aftermath of this drill is just as bizarre. The response to this trauma is a riot.
Oh, the riot episode.
The students stage an impromptu walkout. The chant they use is literally recycled from a previous season. Hey, hey, ho, ho, the SROs have got to go.
Riot police arrive in full tactical gear to shunt the students off ground, and the students fight back.
And how do they fight back?
By utilizing their active shooter training, they throw textbooks, water bottles, whatever's in their backpacks at heavily armored riot.
The tone of this scene is described by the essay as incredibly jarring. It does not play out like a dangerous clash between state forces and angry youth.
No, it plays out to the upbeat tune of the Jam's Modern World.
Students are being violently shoved to the ground and zip-tied while cheering, smiling, and laughing.
It feels less like a gritty drama and more like a harmless, playful sequence from, like, a Jimmy Neutron. No one gets so much as a bloody nose or a bruise.
And we really need to relay a crucial piece of real-world context that the essay points out here, just to keep this completely impartial based on the source.
Right.
The show aired these sanitized, consequence-free riot scenes right in the middle of the real-world Black Lives Matter protests, which created a wildly jarring juxtaposition for the audience watching at home.
The critique also highlights what it terms propaganda during this.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
During the riot, a student named Diego is racially profiled and has a gun drawn on him by a police officer. But then, who steps in?
Officer Wynn.
Officer Wynn. He arbitrarily steps in to save Tony from being arrested, effectively pushing a not all cops narrative right in the middle of a scene supposedly critiquing systemic police violence.
It wants the aesthetic of a riot without any of the political or physical weight.
And how is this massive riot resolved for the school administration?
Through Jessica's activism arc.
Right. Jessica is the student body president. She takes the rap for instigating the riot. Why? To get a gang violence indictment against the school revoked by disgruntled wealthy parents.
Purely so, the school administration will allow them to have a senior prom.
She threatens the principal with proof that the school resource officers disproportionately target students of color. She plays hardball.
But then, she essentially admits to her friends she was bluffing the whole time.
The essay argues that the show's ultimate message regarding youth activism is incredibly...
It paints activists as hypocrites who are perfectly willing to work with the oppressive state apparatus when it suits.
Systemic change and political outrage are reduced to taking the fall so that a group of teenagers can go to a...
It's mad. So, with all of this happening, relentless fake-outs, school shooter drills, riots, how does our main protagonist, Clay Jensen, process this endless, consequence-free trauma?
Well, Clay deals with it by descending into an undefined mental illness, show universe catch-all plot.
Clay's mental break over the course of the season is severe and honestly terrifying. He heavily disassociates. He hijacks and crashes Zach's car earlier.
Right. He tests positive for illicit drugs because he unknowingly ate Charlie's THC-laced camping granola.
He sets a literal car on fire in the school parking lot, completely destroying it, and has absolutely no memory of doing it.
He wanders the streets late at night committing acts. And during the shooter drill, he physically tackles a police officer, disarms him, waves the stolen gun around in a crowded hall.
He also intentionally soils himself to escape a psychiatric hold at a hospital.
Which the critique correctly points out is incredibly difficult for the human body to do on purpose, and highlights a severe, catastrophic psychological break with reality.
Yet, despite exhibiting all of these incredibly dangerous behaviors, his therapist explicitly deems him not a threat and states on the record that he does not need hospitalization.
Medically, legally, logically,
It reveals how the show treats mental illness. They aren't interested in depicting a specific educational reality like schizophrenia, severe bipolar disorder, or dissociative identity disorder.
Instead, they use a vague, shifting set of symptoms to justify whatever wild behavior the plot requires in any given.
Need a mysterious vigilante to spray paint the school? Give Clay temporary dissociative amnesia so he can do it while remaining ignorant?
Need some visual horror elements? Have him hallucinate blood pouring from the ceiling and the rotting bodies of his dead classmates in the locker room?
Mental illness isn't a condition he lives with. It's a writing crutch.
And speaking of writing crutches, we have to talk...
Oh, the ghosts.
Because to avoid the hard work of writing organic character development, like having Clay slowly alienate his friends through his erratic act, or having him actually face a judge for his vandalism, the writers just trap him in a room.
During that chaotic shooter drill, Clay ends up alone in a robotics classroom, and who arrives to keep him company and help him process his trauma?
The ghosts of dead Monty and Bryce, the two most violent antagonists.
The critique identifies this as arguably the weakest, laziest storytelling tool in the show's arsenal. Instead of demonstrating the decline of Clay's relationships through action, the ghosts of his dead peers literally materialize to deliver exposition directly into his ear.
They tell him how he feels. They tell him how his friends secretly feel about him. They explain the plot.
Clay resolves his entire mental breakdown while standing in a room, arguing out loud with hallucinations.
It's like trying to play a video game, but the developers left God mode on. Clay wanders into extreme danger, commits actual felonies, completely alienates his support system, but his health bar never drops. He never faces over.
He doesn't have to cook up any actual personal growth. His emotional epiphanies are just delivered to him by a 247 staffing of Force Ghost.
And because he's playing in God mode, he magically unlocks the final achievement of high school drama, acceptance into an Ivy League university.
Exactly. The writers meticulously protect Clay from organic concepts because they know exactly where he needs to end up for the finale.
Despite suffering severe, unmedicated psychotic breakdowns, alienating his girlfriend Ani, and avoiding his schoolwork to the point of complete distraction, Clay easily sails into Brown University.
Brown University, which, as the essay notes, cost roughly $87,000 a year.
And his wealthy parents are just footing the bill like it's a drop in the bucket. His dad even sets up a one-on-one private meeting with the dean of admissions, like the ultimate unfair nepotism connection.
Which Clay deliberately skips so he can go get drunk with some frat boys.
And he still gets accepted.
Which perfectly transitions us into the glaring wealth inequality and privilege that the show accidentally establishes, but willfully.
Right. Clay's effortless acceptance into an Ivy League school really exposes how insulated these characters are from reality.
Half the cast is ultra-wealthy, and the other half is one missed paycheck away from deportation. Yet the narrative treats their high school drama as if it's the great universal equalizer.
Let's look at Tony's parents. At the end of season 3, his parents were forcibly taken by ICE in a very...
The critique notes that the brutal, systemic, and dehumanizing reality of the immigration court systems is completely scrubbed from the narrative.
Undocumented immigrants have due process rights. They can legally challenge deportations, and the process is grueling and traumatic.
But the show condenses and sanitizes this reality. By season 4, Tony's parents are perfectly happy, safe, and seemingly thriving in picturesque Mexico.
There is virtually no discussion of the trauma of having your life, your home, and your forcibly uprooted.
The show wants the progressive brownie points for bringing up ICE and border issues, but absolutely refuses to do the narrative work of depicting the ugly reality of it.
And Tony's way out of his situation is just as absurd as Clay's. Tony only accepts a fully funded college scholarship to the University of Nevada after he wins 3 corrupt, thick pro-am boxing matches.
Matches that were orchestrated by Officer Wynn.
He steps into a ring, beats up a massive white supremacist who threatens to kill, takes direct, brutal shots to the head, and suffers 0 brain injury, 0 CT, and walks away with a pile of cash and a college education.
Then there is Ani's completely erased struggle. Ani is an immigrant whose mother moved to the United States to work as a live-in assistant and maid.
They live in the guest house of the ultra-wealthy Walker family. The essay points out that Vallejo, California, the real-world city where the show is filmed and disguised as the fictional Evergreen County, is an incredibly...
The Walker house is likely a $700,000 to $1 million property. Ani and her mother are effectively one misstep away from indentured servitude.
But the show completely ignores the precariousness of their visa status and their economic reality. When Ani's mother takes a bad fall, there is 0 mention of the crippling American medical cost, or how being injured affects her ability to perform her live-in service.
Her poverty is just an aesthetic, but the most baffling choice comes at the very end.
Nora Walker, the wealthy mother of the deceased Bryce, offers to fully fund Ani's tuition to Stanford University.
Stanford, which is roughly $62,000 a year just in tuition, is a life-changing generational wealth offer that would permanently secure Ani's future. And what does Ani do?
She declines it, she turns down the tuition, and instead asks Nora Walker to invest that massive sum of money into Hands Off, which is a high school after-school club that makes activist posters.
She chooses to take on massive, crippling student debt, or potentially lose the opportunity to go to college entirely to fund a high school poster-making club.
The essay argues that the show is so sanitized that it forces Ani to decline financial assistance because of some naive bootstrap narrative about making it on your own.
It completely scrubs the reality of the immigrant working-class experience so that everyone can have a neat, tidy, morally uncomplicated ending.
This sanitization of complex issues for the sake of a neat plot twist brings us to the most tragic and honestly offensive mishandling in the entire. We finally arrive at the mystery funeral from the flash forward. The empty box.
It's Justin. Justin Foley is the one in the casket, and the manner of his death is what is so highly scrutinized.
After showing some generic flu-like symptoms and developing a small lesion on his neck, Justin collapsed in episode 9.
In the hospital, he is shockingly diagnosed with HIV-1 that has rapidly developed into AIDS.
Medically speaking, the timeline they give Justin. The show explicitly establishes that Justin contracted HIV from engaging in sex work and sharing heroin needles while he was home prior. Single year.
But unmedicated HIV takes a minimum of 5 to 10 years, often up to 15 years, to destroy the immune system and develop into AIDS.
The critique notes that even in the most severe, unprecedented fringe case, the absolute shortest incubation period recorded is roughly 5. It does not happen in 1.
Furthermore, Justin spent a significant amount of time in a live-in rehab facility for his heroin addiction earlier in the season.
Right.
The essay makes a brilliant, logical point here. Any legitimate live-in medical facility would mandate comprehensive blood work upon admission.
They have to prevent the spread of bloodborne diseases via shared needles among residents. The legal liability massive.
There is absolutely no way his HIV would have gone undetected by medical professionals during his rehab.
By rushing this timeline and ignoring basic medical protocols, the show resurrects 1980s fear-mongering about HIV. It treats the virus like a rapidly aggressive, indiscriminate Grim Reaper.
It ignores decades of medical advancement, education, and advocacy where people with HIV can and do live normal, full lifespans with proper antiretroviral medication.
The writers relied on the ignorance of the gay plague era to deliver a cheap terminal twist for a beloved character.
Which brings us back to the core mission statement of the show. Didn't 13 Reasons Why pride itself on being an educational tool for young viewers?
By spreading blatant medical misinformation about HIV incubation and survivability, it actively harms the very demographic it claims to protect, especially when a much more realistic, tragic, and educational alternative was right there on the...
Exactly. The essay reveals that the actor who plays Justin, Brandon Flynn, actually pitched that his character should die of a drug overdose.
The narrative setup for an overdose was perfect. Justin was isolated from his support systems, he was dealing with the crushing guilt of the murder cover-up, and he was actively struggling with his sobriety.
Showing the lethal reality of a heroin relapse would have been grounded and tragically educational, but the writers chose fantasy black plague, cancer, death AIDS instead, purely because it was more shocking.
And then they undercut the grief of that terrible choice almost immediately. Within 20 minutes of Justin's horrific, emaciated death in a hospital, he is back on...
as a ghost.
Of course. Ghost. Because Clay can't process anything without a hallucination.
Ghost Justin sits on a couch with Clay, bantering, smiling, and giving him brotherly advice on his college admissions essay.
The critique points out a fundamental rule of drama here. When you kill a character, you are supposed to lose act. That profound absence is what creates grief for the characters and the audience.
But the writers wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted the tearjerker tragedy of a death, and they wanted Clay to have his favorite sounding board for the finale. So they just bring Justin back, completely neutralizing any real sense of loss.
The abandonment of character arcs doesn't stop with Justin either. The finale drops almost everyone else's development right off a cliff.
Winston, a character who spent the entire season aggressively seeking justice for Monty because he genuinely loved him, is just dropped. He gets the truth, hugs Alex, and literally just walks away.
Alex, who murdered Bryce, ends up in this uncomfortable black cat / golden retriever trope relationship with Charlie, a guy who continually harassed him publicly until Alex just seemingly gave.
Ani is almost completely scrubbed from the show's final act. She barely speaks.
Zach inexplicably becomes a rebellious degenerate who fails all his classes and destroys property, but gets saved from failure by a random performing arts audition tape he submitted off screen.
It all culminates in a grueling 1 hour and 40-minute graduation episode that is stuffed with empty monologues about the future.
The central driving conflict of the entire season, the cover-up of a murder, is resolved when the local police chiefs basically just decide to ignore the evidence and drop the case off screen because the kid...
And the final scene of the entire series, the culmination of 4 years of television.
Clay and Tony get into Tony's car to drive out to Nevada, and they sit in complete, awkward silence. The camera just...
The critique mentions a theory that this was a deliberate nod to the famous ending of the movie The Graduate, where the characters realize the weight of the unknown future.
Or, perhaps more cynically, that the actors simply had absolutely nothing left to say to each other because their entire relationship was built on bizarre life-or-death trauma that was now abruptly over.
It is a hollow end to a hollow season.
If we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, Season 4 of 13 Reasons Why proves a vital point about storytelling.
When a narrative relies entirely on fake-out, when it operates on God mode and refuses to enforce logical consequences, and when it utilizes real-world traumas like school shootings, deportation, and HIV as cheap, disposable plot twists, it fundamentally fails its mission.
It doesn't start a conversation with the culture. It just ends up talking to itself in an empty room.
And that brings us to the end of our autopsy. The narrative X-ray is broken, the blueprint is a mess. But what does this mean for you, the listener?
Why dissect this so thoroughly?
Because when we consume media, we are entering a contract with the storyteller. We give him our most valuable resource, our time, our empathy, and our trust.
And if a story abandons consequences for its characters, it ultimately abandons its impact on. Without cause and effect, without reality anchoring the drama, the emotional stakes evaporate.
You stop caring because the writer stopped caring.
So here's a final thought to mull over the next time you fire up a streaming service. The next time you are watching a show and you feel it bending reality, pulling unearned 180-degree twist just to keep you hooked on a cliff, ask yourself, are they respecting your time and your
Or are you just driving endlessly on a 12-lane highway to nowhere, playing with the broken pieces of a mouse?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.